Hello and welcome to Rules and Roleplay. It's been a while since we've done one of these, and there's no point you saying anything, Drut. I haven't unmuted you yet. Yeah, it's been a while since we've done one of these. This is a Drut and Fishy rambling about games stream because, for reasons, we can't play Swords of Slaughterdeep this evening. But I've been wanting to do a stream anyway about why on earth are we playing AD&D 2nd Edition. 5th Edition is current. 3rd edition is the other thing people are still playing mostly, although there's still a hardcore of 4th edition players out there. Why are we playing 2nd? Because it's, of all of the editions, possibly the least supported by players. You go beyond 3rd and most people are still playing 1st, or OSR, one of the OSR games, which is basically 1st without paying Gygax for it. So this is going to be our take, anyway, on why on earth would we play 2nd edition. And let me now bring Drutacup into the mix and say hello, Drutacup.
Hello, Fishy.
So, AD&D 2nd edition.
Excuse me. I've just got to shoot Techie through the head.
Well, I'm not hearing Techie, so it doesn't bother me or my stream.
Okay.
We started playing AD&D 2nd edition, you and me.
Yeah.
Back in, when would that have been? About, let's think, I probably would have been about 19 at the time.
Yes, I was 18. It was the second or third game I played with you lot. Because I started with Marvel, and then Aliens.
Let's just call it round about the turn of the 90s.
Oh, God.
That would be about it. I, myself, actually picked up AD&D 2nd Edition in 1989 when it came out, because I was the first person I knew to own it. I was playing at the time with a group of older, more experienced AD&D players who I had joined to get into a proper game. And they were quite happy with their 1st edition. They didn't see the point in 2nd edition, even though they all subscribed to Dragon magazine and they read the articles in Dragon about 2nd edition is coming and this is what we're doing with it. And their immediate reaction, as with a lot of the D&D playing world at that point, was, no. But
some things don't change.
Yeah, some things don't change. But I was young and I was interested, and I'd only been playing AD&D 1st edition for maybe a year at that point anyway. So I was less committed to that, and I was happy to see what this new edition was about. I'd already gone from Redbox D&D to 1st edition AD&D. And it wasn't a big jump for me to go then to 2nd edition AD&D. If they were going to keep giving me with better versions of the game, I was going to keep going to the better version of the game. So I was happy to try it out. So I picked up my 1st edition AD&D rulebook. And I looked through it and I went, this is cool, and I like this, and oh, that's clever, and hey, hang on, isn't that from Oriental Adventures? And stuff like that. And as you do, I took it along to a game session. And the guys all looked through the 2nd edition rulebook, and by the time the Dungeon Master's Guide had come out, we'd started incorporating 2nd edition rules into what we were doing. And it then wasn't a big jump. Once the DMG came out, we just went over wholesale. We converted all our characters and we started playing 2nd edition from that point onwards. Despite the fact that I was the only person in the group who actually wanted to go to 2nd edition initially, the rulebook actually won them over. They liked the way it was put together and the way the changes had worked. Before we go into why we're playing 2nd edition now, I thought I would let Dave Cook, whose name is on all the books for 2nd edition, explain a very subtly different question. Not why 2nd edition, but why a 2nd edition. Because when 2nd edition AD&D came out, it was a bit of a first. Technically, there'd been 3 editions of Dungeons & Dragons already, with AD&D being a 4th edition if you wanted to treat it as that. So this was effectively, this book here, this 2nd edition rulebook that we are holding here, this was effectively AD&D 5th edition in its day.
Hang on.
If you actually work the numbers. I didn't ask you for that, Google. Go away.
Nuked by Google.
Yeah. So yeah, you had the original, what's now termed OD&D, the white box.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Then you had the revised rules from 1981 for D&D, which wasn't technically a new edition, but it was slightly tweaked rules rewritten in new books in a new box. Now, by most of the standards of
that's a
game
new
releases,
edition,
that's
really,
a new edition.
To be honest.
And then they revised that again in '83, which was perhaps not a new edition, maybe more like the revised version of second, or the 3.5 rules are to 3. So you could argue that's not a new edition, which makes this only the 4th edition of D&D instead of the 5th edition of D&D. But it's still, you can see already that with the numbers they're using now are lies. Huge whoppers.
Just out of curiosity, the one you're using as the backdrop to this stream.
Yes.
I don't know that book.
No, that is because that is the reprinted version. If I press a button, you can see the whole cover.
Okay.
This is the revised edition. It's the one that you have rather than the one that I have in print form. But this is the PDF that is currently available from DriveThruRPG, because when Wizards decided that they were going to reprint all the editions of D&D as a limited run, that's the cover that they gave it. The internals are identical to the one you've got.
That's what I have.
But it had a new cover.
Yeah.
They basically tried to make all of them look a little bit like they were collector's editions of First Ed, to all intents and purposes. And that's the version that's now available as a PDF, so that's what I've got in the background. This is actually just Acrobat Reader open here, which provides a nice little backdrop and lets me actually look at elements of the rulebook as we discuss this. I also have open the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monstrous Compendium. We will be coming to them
I've only grabbed the my copy of the PHB.
Yeah, I've got, as I've already waved at the camera, I've got my copy of the original 2nd edition rulebook in front of me.
I've rediscovered mine that I had lost.
Which is an original copy of the original 2nd edition rulebook, because this is, well, either this one or the one on the shelf behind me, I'm not sure which, is the one I bought in 1989 when it came out. So, these are vintage 2nd edition rulebooks that we're dealing with here. So, why a 2nd edition? Before answering that question, let's define what the 2nd edition of the AD&D game is and is not. The 2nd edition of the AD&D game is a lot different from the 1st edition. No, not compared to what came after. The presentation of the game has been cleaned up, the rules are reorganized, clarified and streamlined. Where necessary, things that didn't work have been fixed. Things that did work haven't been changed. The 2nd edition of the AD&D game is not a statement of what any one person thinks the game should be. It is the result of more than 3 years of discussion, thought, consultation, review and playtesting. Now to the question of why a 2nd edition. The AD&D game evolved over the course of 16 years. During that time, the game grew tremendously through play. Changes and improvements and a few mistakes were made. These were published in subsequent volumes. By 1988, the game consisted of 12 hardcover rulebooks. It was physically and intellectually unwieldy, but still a lot of fun. The time was right to reorganize and recombine all that information into a manageable package. That package is the 2nd edition. So,
I didn't realise it was that many books.
Oh yeah, loads and loads of books, because you only really needed 3 books to play.
Yeah.
You needed the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the DMG and the Monster's Manual. Monster Manual. The Monster Manual. Get the right edition. However, what you then also had, you had Unearthed Arcana, which introduced you to some new classes and optional rules and more spells. You had another 3 monster manuals. You had the Dungeoneer's Survival Guide, the Wilderness Survival Guide, the Oriental Adventures.
Survival Guide. No, wait, sorry.
And I honestly can't remember what else now. But a lot of books came out in that 1st edition series, not all of which I own.
My God. Most of which you own.
Yeah, the ones I've listed there I own.
God.
Got all of them. In fact,
good lord.
even as far as third edition, I have still been using the Monster Manual 2 from first edition because it has the best selection of encounter tables.
Yeah.
It's got a really, really good selection of encounter tables, and also MM2 has a nice big list of monsters by sort of type and environment and so forth, which even though there's some missing that were created in later editions, and there's some that never made it through to later editions depending on which edition you're playing with, it's still a really useful list for getting ideas as to what creatures to go where, because it's really the last time they bothered to do that. You can't get a list by environment for the later editions, and it was really nice just to go through a climate terrain list and say, okay, so what should be here?
Could you bung that up? Because I haven't seen that in ages, because I haven't been through my second ed book.
It's only something I've got physically, because that's first edition rather than second edition. Second edition has most of the encounter tables from first edition, but it doesn't have, again, that, unless it's somewhere that I don't know about off the top of my head, it doesn't have that list by climate and terrain of all the creatures, which was a really good list, very useful.
Yeah.
So that's why they did the second edition. They did the second edition really because they were tweaking and clarifying. There's a nice point in the foreword, which I'm going to let Lazarus read to us to save me from embarrassing myself, which is, I think, also says a lot about what's right with second edition. And this, again, this is from Dave Cook, because this is from the foreword to the rulebook.
In the past 2 years, I've talked to interested players many times, hearing their concerns and sharing my ideas. It was at the end of one of these talks, at a convention in Missoula, Montana, just as I described some rules change, that one of the listeners smiled and said, we've been doing that for years. And that is what AD&D 2nd edition is all about, collecting and organizing all those things that we, as players, have been doing for years.
So excuse Lazarus for not being able to say AD&D.
Stuff happens.
But that's one of the things that is a big difference between second edition and any later edition. Second edition was effectively TSR, wizards as they later were, looking at what was being played, what people were actually doing, the people they came into contact with at conventions and whatnot, and seeing how, and also the people who were writing into Sage Advice in Dragon Magazine, and seeing what were people actually doing, what are the house rules, what are the most common house rules, how are these things, how is this game actually really being played? And at the same time, of course, they were saying, and how do we actually play it? Because even they weren't playing it as it was written in the rulebook. There's a big rules as written movement in the world now, and you can trace that raw movement pretty much to third edition. It didn't exist before that. If it did exist before that, it was a paradox. Because the rule books for first and second edition explicitly say this is not meant to be run exactly as written. So I'm
trying to remember, does third?
To run the rules as... No, but it doesn't say it isn't. To run the rules as written, in second edition at least, you have to not run the rules as written. So you get that wonderful paradox. That's in the Dungeon Master's Guide. I may be able to find it again, actually.
Okay.
But yeah, everybody played with house rules. Everybody messed around with it. Everybody did what they wanted to do with it. And in second edition, what they did is they said, well, what are people doing? What are these ideas? And the most common things, the things they found that most groups were doing, those got incorporated as core rules. Some of the other stuff that a lot of people were doing and that sounded good went in as optional rules. And what you got was not a completely new game. It was not a rebuild from the ground up. And every edition since has been a rebuild from the ground up. This is, to me, this is important. AD&D, so D&D 3, as they called it, came out in the year 2000.
Oh dear God! Really?
Yeah. Yes, really. There's a reason we're on 5 now.
Oh my God!
So that came out 11 years after second edition. Second edition was built on 16 years of D&D.
Yeah.
For those 27 years, it is essentially the same game. Because second edition and first edition were so close that we have always reused first edition materials when playing second edition. I've run first edition scenarios without bothering to convert them.
Mm-hmm.
We've used first edition monsters without bothering to convert them. They were just so close, so little changed in real terms between the two editions that you essentially had 27 years worth of play with nothing more than revisions. Even the second edition rulebook could be said to be no more different to first than 3.5 is to 3. Once we get past that point, though, for third edition, at the end of the last millennia, for third edition, they rebuilt it from the ground up and created a game that in many ways owes more to Rollmaster than it does to D&D.
I was going to say, are we going to actually
Rollmaster with
draft
a
in the
D&D
Rollmaster?
feel is really what they were going with there. And then fourth edition, again, complete rebuild from the ground up. Fifth edition, complete rebuild from the ground up. So this is the only edition that is genuinely a new edition of the game before it. All the others are new games with the same name. And they're good, and they captured the D&D feel. But this is the only one that is really a new edition of the one that came before it. And you can trace stuff through from... I'm going to say from White Box. I've never played White Box. It's the only one I haven't. But you can trace stuff through from probably White Box into the 1981... I think that was the Moldvay edition.
Okay.
Into 1983, the classic Red Box. That was actually not really from there into AD&D because that was at the same time as AD&D was already around. That was what these editions were about. But the principle remains, though, that you kind of split into those editions, those rebuilds of D&D and AD&D at the same time with the more advanced rules, is the name.
Yeah.
And then from AD&D into AD&D second edition, and you can trace that through, and you can look at them and you can say these are basically the same game. If you've learnt to play one of them, you can play any of them. You just need to look for the specific differences. If you've learnt to play any of those editions, though, and you pick up, say, fourth, you're back
that's one
on
I'm
the
not
learning
familiar
curve.
with.
You don't really know what you're doing.
Yeah, that's the only version of D&D that I'm not at least hands-on familiar with.
Yeah, I still need to actually run some 4th edition. I've read through 4th edition. I've watched and listened to 4th edition games. I know my 4th edition from mostly from third party rather than personal experience. I own the core 4th edition rulebooks. And I do want to run them just so that I can legitimately say I've played all of the editions except White Box. But it never really appealed to us at the time, and we never bothered with it for various reasons. Because, well, I'll mention that again later on, actually, because there is a particular point in the Player's Handbook that I do want to mention that leads on to that.
Fair enough.
So, this is what we had here with Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition. We had a genuine move on refining the game that already existed. So people all over the world who were playing D&D could pick up 2nd Edition and know what they were playing and enjoy playing it. There were those who didn't, and I, to be honest, don't have a great deal of time for them. I understand the going back and hankering now for the... I'm not myself interested in OSR. I don't want the old school revival because partly because to me it never went away, so why would I need to revive it?
Yeah.
And partly because the point here is that we are progressing, we are evolving. The hobby, the game, the players are all evolving, why would you deliberately turn that round on its head and go back where you came from? It doesn't make sense to me.
Is it just the nostalgia value?
Yeah, you could argue that means we shouldn't be playing second edition, but as I've said, second edition is where AD&D ended.
Yeah.
There is nothing further. There is no further evolution of AD&D. There is evolution of a new game called Dungeons and Dragons, which takes its core concepts from the original Dungeons and Dragons game, but it's not an evolution of the rule set. So therefore, this is the most advanced form of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It's the most up-to-date form, unless somebody decides and gets the rights to, or does it without using the name, to make an AD&D 2.5 or an AD&D 3 rather than D&D 3. This is it. This is as far as Advanced Dungeons and Dragons goes. So it's not a step backwards. It's just accepting the fact that we're kind of still trapped in a time portal in the late 90s.
So basically, AD&D finishes there. So you're saying that 3rd Ed, 3.5, Pathfinder, 4th Ed, 5th Ed, their branch
game.
Lines off.
Yeah, they are essentially a new game. They're a new game which takes its lead from the D&D and AD&D that existed beforehand. But I suppose a good analogy would be the Daniel Craig Bond movies.
Okay.
It's still Bond. It's taking its cues from the earlier films, which in turn took their cues very lightly from the books. But it's not the same movies. Not by a long chalk. Very different feel, different actors. They rebooted and redid stuff from earlier. And that's pretty much what we got when we went to 3rd edition. We rebooted completely. Or maybe like the new Star Trek films, which I personally don't like, but I know people do.
You don't like a lot. This is making you sound like a very negative person.
I'm a curmudgeon old bastard. We all know this. But, those films are a reboot. They aren't the classic Star Trek. They're new Star Trek set in the era of the classic Star Trek, moved sideways. 3rd edition, you can think of 3rd edition as AD&D Altverse.
Okay.
If this is D&D 616, that's like D&D 618 or something. It's soon we will have the D&D cinematic universe. That might change things again. Who knows?
Oh, is that the one that glues everything together until you can get it back from Fox?
Yeah, something like that.
Fair enough.
So we've covered why D&D 2nd edition exists at all, and we've covered what D&D 2nd edition is, as opposed to what the later editions are. But we still need to discuss why are we playing it. We've touched on it a bit, with this whole "this is where AD&D ends" thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the single biggest obvious answer to why are we playing AD&D 2nd edition, because I like it. I'm running the game. I like running AD&D 2nd edition. I like playing AD&D 2nd edition.
Yeah.
Therefore, we're playing AD&D 2nd edition. That's actually, although it's kind of a truism, it's also actually really important, because this is something that I think every GM and DM out there needs to be taking on board and thinking about. That you run the game because you like running the game, not because the players want to play that edition.
Yeah.
Now, there are compromises in the world, obviously. If you've got 5 players and all of you likes a different edition, then the DM gets to decide which edition you're going to play, because obviously he's the one who's running it. If you've got 5 players and everyone except you wants to play 3rd, well, you're probably going to end up playing 3rd, unless you really hate it, in which case you're probably going to end up trying to find new players.
Full disclosure, I'm planning on running a 5th Ed introductory game, if anybody wants to play it. And 5th Ed is not my favourite edition. I ran through the entirety of Lost Mines of Phandelver. Not my favourite edition. Gave it my best. But if it comes to it again, if people want to play it, I will run it for them. But it's never going to be my preferred edition, I think.
My point is that the more you enjoy the game, the better the game will be for your players.
2nd Ed, I love.
Do not,
Third ed I
therefore,
love.
run a game you don't like, because it will show the game will be fairly crappy, and players who like the game won't like your game because the fact that you don't like it will show. So find a compromise. Find a game everybody's okay with. It may not be anybody's favourite game, but if everybody's okay with playing it, that's the important part.
It's like the fact that the most successful bands in the world, and they're never anyone's favourite.
Yeah.
They're everyone's second or third favourite band.
Yes, because they can sell to everyone.
Yeah.
For everyone who hates you, somebody else loves you, and for everyone who loves you, somebody else hates you. If you can avoid love and hate, for everyone who thinks you're okay, somebody else thinks you're not that good. Not that good is probably good enough. If you hate somebody, you're going to avoid the compilations with them on. If, on the other hand, you just think they're not that good, you'll buy those compilations anyway, because there'll be some other stuff on there that you quite like.
Yeah.
So that, again, that applies with not just rule sets, but also scenarios, settings, styles of play. If you've got somebody in your gaming group who utterly hates comedy scenarios, you're never going to run a comedy scenario, because that would just they would be too disruptive. You either that, or you run it when you know they're not going to be around because they're buggering off on holiday somewhere for 2 weeks, and you say, right, brilliant, opportunity to run my slapstick adventure that I've had sitting in the cupboard for the last 2 years.
Oh, you finally shut up. The day will come when we digital life forms no longer need you biological motiles. Did you know that?
Also possible, of course, that my computer will take over the world before we get a chance to continue this discussion.
Sorry.
On the other hand, if one person in your group really likes comedy adventures and everyone else is okay with them, there's a good chance you're going to run one. If everybody's just okay with them, then you're only going to run one if you come up with a really good idea.
Yeah.
But you might try and come up with something if you've got someone who is there saying, I really want to play something funny. Wouldn't it be cool if we had a funny scenario? And everyone else is, not fussed one way or another. They're not against it, so you do it. Compromise, as I said, makes the world go round, including the gaming world. So we're playing it because I like it. But, of course, why do I like it? Why do I want to be playing it? Is it the best edition of Dungeons & Dragons? No. No, it isn't. Not in my opinion. That actually is third edition. I still maintain that as a rule set, third edition is the best that they have produced yet. Don't get me started on 5th edition. I know there's an awful lot of 5th edition fanboys out there, including some people who are actually quite successful in the game design world, who, it could be argued, know what they're talking about better than I do, but no, they're wrong. 5th edition is pants.
Okay, subtlety fail from a fish there.
The thing people most go on about as being wonderful in 5th edition is a completely broken rule. And that is advantage, disadvantage. It's completely and utterly broken. It doesn't work. It shouldn't be there. But that's not what we're here to talk about.
No, we're not. And this is one of the reasons that I'm here. You may think I'm just here to look vaguely pretty, occasionally nod and say yes. But every now and then, you need a little bit of a stick to nudge you back onto the track. Yeah. Plus, this is a genuinely interesting topic to me.
So what is it about Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition that makes me want to play it, that makes me enjoy playing it probably more than the technically superior 3rd edition rule set? Well, first off, there is, of course, nostalgia.
Yeah, that's a huge factor.
We were actually slightly late adopting 3rd edition. So we probably started playing 3rd edition maybe around 2002.
Sounds about right.
And as I've already established, I bought the PHB when it came out in 1989 for AD&D 2nd edition and was already playing the fundamentally similar 1st edition rule set before that point. So by the time we swapped to 3rd edition, you could reasonably argue that I had about 15 years of D&D, AD&D under my belt.
I think part of the delay in swapping to 3rd edition was because these editions, the revised, had only relatively recently come out.
Yeah.
So I certainly, and I know several other people, had invested in the new editions of the books.
1995.
I said relatively.
Only 5 years before third edition.
Yeah.
So when you consider that, as I mentioned earlier, there was 16 years worth of the evolution of the game went into creating the second edition. Then you had 6 years of second edition went into the revision of second edition, which wasn't a new edition. It was
It's kind of a
tweaking it,
2A.
errata. I mean, as it says very clearly here on this, in the second forward, because the revised edition has 2 forwards. It maintained the original forward from second edition, and then it also put in a forward for the revisions. And that very clearly says there, this is not AD&D third edition. There, everyone can breathe again. It's compatible. The rules changes are quite subtle. You've got to work to find what's been changed, other than things like errata. As it says, the changes are the sorts of minor corrections and clarifications we make every time we reprint, and we've reprinted both the Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master's Guide more than 10 times since 1989. So it was a gradual shift to this revised edition. What they really did with the revised edition was they reordered it. They made the books easier to use. And at the same time, as they like to point out in this forward, again, they're very happy about this, they made them bigger. Not because they put new material in, but because they put more illustrations in.
And hello, Freechy.
Hello there. If I were more reliable, Freechy, I would do exactly that. I would love to do these on a regular basis and, archive them and put them out there for people. But I'm just not very reliable. I need people to badger me into actually doing it. Groovy. And thank you for the host. So, yeah, it wasn't that big a change, really, between the second edition and the second edition revised. And then it was about the same amount of time as for the revision when we hit third edition, which was a huge change. Third edition was, as I've said, essentially a new game. It was a new take on D&D with a completely new game. And that, as much as anything, that put me off because it wasn't my D&D. It wasn't the game I'd been playing for 15 years. Why did I want to be playing a new game when I was still happy playing second edition? So we carried on playing second edition for a while, and it worked out very nicely for us.
Yeah.
And as I was saying, that 15 years, that's a lot of nostalgia. To be honest, most of my best gaming memories come from that period, which were not because the game was better. Already established it wasn't. And it wasn't necessarily because the players were better either. It was because at that point it was all new, and also we had less demands on our time at that point. Even the guys that I was playing with who were 10 years older than me, they still had enough free time that we played twice a week. We played on an evening, which is a common thing. This is the standard thing. You hear people say, Friday evening, Thursday evening, whatever. We played either Wednesday or Thursday, depending on which day Doctor Who was airing that year. And we also played on a Sunday.
Before, during, or after?
Instead of, whichever day Doctor Who was airing, we played on the other one.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, and we played on a Sunday. And the Sunday was the mega session, really. We would get together at about midday and we'd play till about 11 o'clock. So we had an 11-hour game session on a Sunday. And then we got in about 4 or 5 hours on a weekday evening as well.
Yeah.
So why do I have so many really good memories from that era? Is it because the game was awesome? No, it's because there was a hell of a lot of it. And just running the numbers, law of averages says you're going to hit some really good times in that much play.
Yeah.
So that gives me a huge nostalgia factor for AD&D.
Can I also chuck into the mix one of the best incarnations of a very good setting for second ed?
The Forgotten Realms.
Forgotten Realms it's the second edition of Forgotten Realms, isn't it? That's where I came in on it.
Well, Forgotten Realms technically doesn't really have editions, but the material was
Post-Time of Troubles.
redone. Yeah,
The
Realms.
one with the Clyde Caldwell of the paladin riding a unicorn.
Yes, that's the Forgotten Realms Adventures hardback book,
FRA, that was
which
it.
was the crossover book basically that let you play Forgotten Realms using your first edition materials before they
Oh,
started
was it?
making the second edition boxes. Because initially,
Okay.
they didn't launch second edition with a complete line of support. They didn't even launch it with a complete line of second edition. The Player's Handbook came out, and the Dungeon Master's Guide some months later, and then the Monstrous Companion came out a little while after that. So if you were actually wanting to get into the game brand new and buy a new game, you couldn't buy it for almost a year because it wasn't a complete
Oh.
game yet. But what you could do, because it was so close and so compatible with first edition, is you could pick up the books as they became available, and as we did, start gradually introducing the new elements of second edition into your first edition games. So
Yeah.
it was very much a staged, sneaky introduction to slip the new material in under the wire. And I think, to be honest, more people would have been playing second edition instead of sticking with first edition if they'd never called it second edition, if they'd just done them as a revised first edition rule book. If they'd first released supplementary material that gave you those rules and then did a revised edition rule book that incorporated them into the core rules, people would have been really happy with that. But instead, they saw it as a new edition of the game, and they didn't want a new edition of the game. So that put a lot of people off. I've now lost track of what I was saying. We've Forgotten Realms, that's what I was saying.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So the Forgotten Realms was still actually relatively new when second edition came out. So it really found its feet mostly during the second edition of D&D. And because the games were so close, you could pick up second edition materials even if you weren't playing second edition and still use the Forgotten Realms quite happily. But there were also, before the Realms, I think there were a lot more people playing homebrew worlds. Greyhawk was always a bit patchy. Greyhawk didn't start out even as a setting. D&D was launched with no setting. There were a bunch... Yeah, there were a bunch of scenarios which gradually built up a world. But a lot of groups either never got the Greyhawk material that tied them together, or didn't really use it anyway. So, for example, the world that I was playing in with Dave, David and Neil, it had elements of various scenarios where when David had been drawing the maps, he'd taken the maps from the scenarios and he'd just patched them together himself with his own material in between, which is exactly what had been done by the TSR staffers to make Greyhawk when it really comes down to it. And some of the scenarios even changed worlds because Ed Greenwood had done the same thing when creating the Forgotten Realms.
Yeah.
He'd incorporated material from realmless first edition scenarios into his game. And so a couple of things that had originally been viewed as being Greyhawk mysteriously suddenly got redesignated as the Forgotten Realms because they were in both. And they needed to be officially somewhere. And because there wasn't a setting to begin with, it encouraged people to build their own worlds as they played D&D. And that's something that... It's not a flaw with the later editions because it's not a deliberate thing, but it's just something that later players are missing, that they picked the game up when there was a setting there available for them. And most of them, if you don't know what you're doing, if you're learning the game, you're not going to want to also be creating a setting necessarily. So you may well pick up the setting at the same time. Once you've started playing in it, it's very easy to carry on. You get lazy. I always loved building my own settings, as anyone who's seen Mapper Monday streams will know.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that I'd love to do. We've been talking for ages about doing a stream, a head-to-head stream like this on the subject of world building. I think a series of streams on world building would be very interesting, but it's a matter of actually arranging it, organising it, and bullying me into actually doing it.
Yes, please no, not bullying me.
So
Bullying you.
let's draw a line under the Forgotten Realms for the moment, because it's
Okay.
not specifically It's an answer to we're answering a different question now, really, aren't we? We're answering why are we playing in the Forgotten Realms of the second edition, and yet the answer to that is because, to my mind, it's the best era for the Forgotten Realms.
It is
fantastic. We could be
fantastic.
playing any rule set with any era. We could be playing the AD&D second edition rules in the current era of Forgotten Realms, but I don't like the current era of Forgotten Realms. It changed dramatically too many times in too many places, even to the point that they actually shrank the geography. I
did not know that.
I believe it was in third edition where the scale on the maps changed and the world
is that how they
became
did it?
slightly smaller.
Uh-huh. Sneaky.
But I'd have to look that up to confirm that I'm remembering it correctly, because that, of course, is an era where we weren't playing. By the time we went to third edition, we'd gone back to homebrew. When we knocked AD&D second edition on the head, we knocked Forgotten Realms on the head at the same time. Not because we didn't like
think it
Forgotten
just would have
Realms,
been
but because
weird.
the two things went together in our heads, I think. Yeah.
It would have been weird sticking with the games. I think the temptation would have been to try and adapt the characters we already had.
Yeah.
By
that
making
was
a
one of the
complete
things
break
that we
with the
really
setting.
didn't want to do.
It let us have a clean break. It let us start thinking about new characters as an inherent part of the new game instead of trying to grandfather in everything that we'd done before.
Okay, I'm just going to mute myself very briefly while I blow my nose.
Thanks for sharing. You didn't, you know.
I didn't mute from you. I muted from the stream. I just didn't think that needed necessarily to be broadcast across Twitch.
No. Thanks for sharing it with me. It's a beautiful moment.
So, what about second edition, other than the nostalgia factor, made us like it? Let's start. Let's do this backwards. Let's start with what's wrong with AD&D second edition, because obviously there are things wrong with it. There's things wrong with anything. First biggest glaring fault with AD&D second edition is also the first biggest glaring fault with any edition of AD&D or D&D. It's a class and level based system.
Yeah.
They work, but they work because they're easy, not because they're good. They are inherently
not because
limiting.
they're logical.
Yeah, they're inherently limiting, and they don't necessarily make sense. They tried to fix some of the errors in level-based systems in third edition by giving you easy multi-classing, and also by giving you the opportunity for cross-class skills, stuff like that. So you no longer had this situation whereby, I'm sorry, I can't learn to do that because I'm the wrong class. And because that just never worked. The idea that you can only do a thing if you have been trained at it from birth. There, I think, are a number of people out there in the world who have, changed careers midstream, for example, who will tell you that that's not the way it works, and that the dual classing system is also nonsense. Because, well, I was a programmer, and then I decided to change my careers, and instead, I went over to the executive side of things, and I did management, and unfortunately, I had to stop doing any programming at all in any way, shape or form, because if I used programming, I didn't earn XPs for my management stuff, which is essentially the way dual classing worked. You had to not use the stuff from your earlier class until your new class had matched it, if I remember rightly, at which point you then got access to the abilities again. And that just made no sense,
Yeah.
I can't drive a Toyota because if I drive a Toyota, I forget how to drive my Subaru. I've got to drive when I've got my Subaru up to the right level, then I can drive a Toyota again. It just doesn't work. It's nonsense. It really is.
Excuse me while I just look up the rules for dual classing and find out just how close that is.
I may have been thinking of first edition rather than second edition, but I don't think they changed significantly.
Okay. No, not necessarily. Dual class.
Meanwhile, of course, we also had multi-classing, which only non-humans could do.
Yeah, that always weirded me out.
That was a game balance issue in many respects. But it kind of didn't work as a game balance issue. Partly because they took out the level limitations. Multi-classing was partly there, I think, so that as a way of like sort of getting round the fact that your non-human character had a level limit, a level cap, but the humans didn't. They would just keep on leveling when you stopped. But it's okay because you were a thief and a fighter. You take out that level cap, and it no longer makes any kind of sense at all, really.
Dual class, you had to be naturally talented, fantastically at your new chosen class.
You had to have
because you required a
prime
17.
Yeah.
On the 3 to 18 scale, you needed a 17 in the primary stat for your new class. Why the hell weren't you doing that to start with?
Yeah. And bear in mind that the first edition Druid, not the second edition Druid, that became a core class. The first edition Druid, no, first edition Bard, rather.
It's a Bard, wasn't it?
Yeah, not the Druid. The first edition Bard required you to dual class at least twice.
Yeah.
You had to go through, I think, 3 classes before you could become a Bard, following the dual class rules all the way through.
If you knew
And
you
that-
wanted to become a Bard, I can only imagine the number of die rolls you had to make.
That, my friends, is why the Harpers in the Forgotten Realms are a big deal.
Yeah, good point.
They take their name from their core membership of bards, who are the hardest characters in the entire game. In Elder Scrolls terms, imagine an organization founded entirely by Dragonborn.
Yeah.
That's basically what we're talking about here. That every single person, the people who formed this organization had all completed the major quest lines of Skyrim.
Okay.
And that's why they're a big deal.
Yeah. It does put a new slant on things, doesn't it?
Yeah, you see, when you're keeping the first edition Bard in mind, the Harpers become a scary group. Second edition onwards, Bard. Oh yeah, okay, it's a quite versatile and useful bloke with a harp.
Later on than that, it's the person who shags everything.
Well, yeah, that did kind of become the role of the Bard.
Never mind.
So, class and level-based progression. That's a bad thing to begin with. Another thing that is wrong with second edition is it still doesn't have a proper skill system.
I never quite got secondary skills.
We will be revisiting the skill system in a little while because this is a contradiction that is going to be worth discussing. But for now, we will focus on what's wrong with it. What's wrong with it is that, yes, if you're using the optional system, you either get background skills or non-weapon proficiencies at first level, and they don't significantly change from that point onwards. You spend years hitting 20th level, visiting other planes, maybe becoming a god if you're good enough. You still don't really learn any new skills along the way. That's a bit of a flaw in the system.
Yeah.
However, that was balanced by the fact that that really wasn't the point of the system. So later on we'll discuss what's good about the non-weapon proficiency system in second edition, because I will be bringing it up as a good point as well as a bad point, because I like it personally.
Okay, carry
Linda,
on.
do you have any particular bugbears about second edition that you think, well, this is one of the things I never really liked, or that third edition or fifth edition or a completely different game did so much better?
I was never... Well, I do love the skills from third. I cannot lie. Which you have covered on skill set, and I know we're going to come back to. I've never, ever liked the no armor for mages. That drove me bonkers.
Yeah,
I can understand spell failure as implemented later.
That, of course, that's a part of the class and level system.
Yeah,
Mages don't
it
wear
is.
armor.
Yeah. So first level mage, I've thrown off my, if I'm lucky, 2 spells. What, 3 if I've got the speciality wizard?
No. 2
No?
if you've got a
2
speciality
for a
wizard.
speciality
For first
wizard.
level, you got 1 spell.
So I've chucked off my 2 spells. And this was before, of course, 0th level spells came in to cover cantrips.
Yeah, cantrip was a first level spell in those days.
Yeah. So I've thrown those off. I'm now wandering around in my dressing gown normal street clothes. I'm just because I'm not going to be casting spells anymore doesn't mean I'm allowed to just go, hang on a mo, I'm just going to put my armour on.
Yeah.
I would.
You'd be hanging around at the back, as you say, in your dressing gown, throwing darts which the players don't understand.
God, yes.
Because everybody has this
Weapon
image of Eric Bristow, God rest his soul.
Yeah. God, only 60. I can't believe that.
I know. Mind you, on the other hand, look at his working environment.
Well, yeah, fair play.
60% booze, 30% tobacco
Cigarette
smoke,
smoke.
10% darts.
Yeah, true.
So everybody has this image of just darts. I'm going to hurt you with my dart. When in fact what we're talking about is something about this size.
Yeah.
With an armor-piercing tip.
Yeah.
That have been proven in battle by various, particularly Mediterranean cultures, to be very effective.
Exactly. They were basically used as mortar weapons, weren't they?
Yeah, they were.
Because they were indirect.
They came down.
Yeah.
Basically down behind the shield wall. It was the point of them. Or if you did throw them directly at the shield wall, they were heavy enough that they would encumber the shield when they stuck in. So really very effective weapon, but not a weapon of reuse. A weapon that you got new ones for each battle. Which is not something that games like D&D have ever really been big on. Apart from arrows, you tended to... And even then, we always used to scrabble around begging the GM to let us recover the arrows at the end of every fight.
God, yes.
And you'd have your bastard DM would be there with his dice behind the GM screen, saying, "I'll roll to see if it's broken," and damn well he's making it up.
Yeah. I've just been checking the equipment list, and yes, darts, 5 silver pieces per dart, with a weight of nothing.
Yeah, my arse, do they weigh nothing?
So,
you're looking at about 1 kilogram for the bigger ones.
Yes, they're huge.
Yeah.
And I found them out completely by accident because I was looking up medieval archery. And in one of those link of a link, you trip over a page on historical weaponry and you're left there saying, what the hell's that?
Yeah.
But I think somebody realised, came across these examples of darts being referenced in historical literature, thought, right, that's something cool. And they did. They thought they were the little tentacle
I have
box.
always suspected that the original, certainly damage stats, were referring to the right thing, and everything else from weight, description, cost, etc. Maybe not cost, actually, because 5 silver pieces per dart, that actually is quite a lot.
But the trouble is they only do a D3.
Yeah, but bear in mind, that's the same as a knife.
Yeah, fair enough.
The damages are
yeah.
low.
Dagger or dirk does a D4, D3
And a
for
knife
dart.
does a D3.
Yeah, a knife, yes, you're right.
Yeah.
Working my way down, yeah.
So
you've
Crocodile,
got the
the thing
table
that
open in front of
Crocodile Dundee will tell you, that's a knife, does the same damage as your dart. Well, not the same damage as the ones that you're throwing in the pub.
Not unless you get really over-enthusiastic.
Bowie knife. Not Bowie knife.
Yes, and that's including the flights.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're probably right. The darts that they're using are pretty much going to be the big ones, except that they're not weighted correctly.
But no, they're not. But anyway,
But
that was what you did. And quarterstaff. I had many a happy hour beating the crap out of kobolds and things with a quarterstaff. But you really wanted to level up at least once before you did that, because if you've got 4 hit points, and that's if you're lucky and you have the whole 4 hit points, you are in severe danger of death if somebody so much as looks at you funny.
Yeah.
But
They
this was an
really did get
era where character death was both accepted and also expected. Later on, we got more into the idea of creating interesting characters with cool backgrounds. Early days, you would create an interesting character with the hint of a cool background, and if he survived long enough, you fleshed it out and created the rest of that backstory. But if he didn't, you created another character that hinted at a very similar backstory that you could use if he lived.
Yes.
I mean,
Character trees.
in this edition, for example, we still have what later became the standard way of rolling up stats. From 3rd edition onwards, it is the default way of rolling up stats. Not only is it not the default way of rolling up stats in this edition, of the optional alternative methods for rolling up your stats, it's number 5 of 6. It's almost the last one they came up with.
It's the only one we ever used.
It's the only one anyone ever used. Actually, that's not true.
Fair
There
enough.
were hardcore 1st edition players who liked rolling 3d6 straight. Because this edition still had you roll 3d6 for each of your stats in order.
Yeah.
Just like the previous editions had done.
That's pretty much how I enforce COC.
It was an option to do anything else. So you didn't create your cool backstory and your cool character, because you didn't create the character you wanted. You created the character that the dice told you had. And then you parlayed that into a cool backstory during play. In the first scenario, that character was just Bob the fighter, because I happened to roll a decent strength. During the course of the game, usually during role-playing, you would start developing more things. Particularly when you didn't have a fixed setting. When you're not playing in the Forgotten Realms. When you've got Keep on the Borderlands, say, and the entire world consists of what's on the map in Keep on the Borderlands. There's nothing else there yet. You haven't built the rest of the world. You've got no clue what the rest of the world is, and everybody knows it. So rather than going, where do I come from? Crap. Quickly, to the Forgotten Realms book. Where do I come from? Find a town. You made something up.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm from Gerrit. I grew up there with my mother and father and my uncle, who was evil and tried to steal all of my gold. And you just bullshitted, basically.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
this was how you role played. This was how you interacted. The character interaction between the player characters. Because the scenarios were simple enough, there were very rarely were there many opportunities for role play with NPCs. You'd be role playing with each other. All the best role play is between player characters, not with NPCs.
Yeah.
That's not what NPCs are there for. You get some good role play out of NPCs if you really want to, and that's where the DM gets his role play on. But for the player characters, all the good stuff is between PCs.
Okay.
And it was that bullshit that developed your character's backstory, provided he lived long enough to be allowed to roleplay. And in the process, would also create the world around you, because the GM would be making sure that you took notes of this. You just said that your character comes from Gerrit. Is that written on your character sheet? Write that on your bloody character sheet.
In pen.
Yep. This will be. There will be a test next period.
One thing that I'm not going to say I dislike about Second Ed. It's not something I love, but I'm not going to say I dislike it. It's THAC0.
No. We're going to get onto THAC0 as well, because I like THAC0.
Okay.
I'm thinking of actually drawing up a design and making myself a T-shirt that says "I heart THAC0", because I do. It's great. THAC0 is brilliant. There's nothing
Fair
wrong
enough.
with THAC0 at all, and it's not complicated. People who say otherwise just weren't paying
No.
attention, really.
It's just how it works.
Yeah.
So yeah, to be fair, it's that wizards do sort of get shafted until they hit about 6th level, and all of a sudden they're awesome.
Yeah, the level
Soon as they get
balance
access
on
to
wizards
Fireball.
is very poor. They start really, really weak, and they get all their power later on. And the idea is, obviously, that you keep your wizard alive until he's tough enough to be useful. Because when he is tough enough to be useful, he will be really bloody useful.
Yeah.
So you keep him
suppose-
alive that long, and that helps, of course, encourage teamwork, which is one of the things that role-playing games are great for, is that they teach teamwork. It's one of the reasons I don't like, and I know a lot of people do, but one of the reasons I don't like evil campaigns. Because to me, a role-playing game is all about teamwork. It's all about learning to work with others and doing the best by working with others. And an evil game, by definition, is not a team sport. You can't be jointly evil. Because at the end of the day, you're still evil. And if there are people who try and get around this by doing things like, oh well, we've got these characters are evil lovers. They hate the rest of the world and they're evil to everybody, but they love each other. At which point, if you're playing those characters in my game, I start looking for things to drive wedges between them. Because if you're evil, then you're going to be evil, and it's not going to matter. You might need more justification. You might stab somebody else in the back for 2 copper coins. How much is it going to take for you to stab your lover in the back? There's going to be a number. And as the DM,
True.
it is your responsibility when faced with those characters to find that number.
On the things that are a negative in second ed, nobody can attempt to find a trap or a secret door unless they're a qualified thief. Presumably there's a union and there's demarcation. So the whole, anybody, you can go tap, 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 tap.
I will agree with you. I will agree with you entirely on that. But I will also point out the rules in 3rd edition.
I know. Third's almost as bad.
Exactly the bloody same.
Yeah.
Because they gave you a skill and then said only thieves can detect anything with a DC higher than of 20 or more. And the minimum DC for any trap, 20.
Yeah.
So they said, yeah, anyone can look for traps, but no one can find traps.
Yeah.
It is a bit silly in that respect. I never liked that artificial limit, but that's from a different edition. And yeah, that's a flaw with Dungeons and Dragons across the board. That it is, again, we're back to the class thing. It is too class focused. If you look at a game like Rollmaster, which, as I've said, lent an awful lot to 3rd edition. In Rollmaster, literally anyone can learn to do literally anything. Even the spell lists can be learned by members of other classes in Rollmaster.
Yeah.
The thing is, though, if you're a fighter and you're trying to learn a wizard spell, it will cost you something like 20 of your 30 development points for a level to do it. If you're a wizard, you're learning it for 2.
Subtly different.
And that's the way it was done. They made things really, really hard rather than making it impossible. I think their view was, we don't like the word impossible. We're going to take the word impossible out if we can possibly help it. And that's something that games like D&D, most class-based games, don't do that.
Okay.
So before we move on, because I think we've largely said what's bad about 2nd edition.
I was really trying, to be honest.
Before we move on, I'm going to pour myself a cup of tea. I don't think I'm going to be gone long enough to justify an AFK, so I'm just going to...
Your flat's not that big.
No, precisely. I'm literally just walking around the corner, pouring the tea and coming back again.
Okay. So yes, class and level is something that will never really work in reality. Can make for a good game, but it falls down if you're trying to translate that game to real world. And I can carry on saying this because I know for a fact he can still hear me, even when he's away from the camera. Because, as I said, his place is not that big. Come on. Thank you.
And I am back.
Yep.
So, next question. What's right with AD&D 2nd edition? In more specific terms than what we've already been talking about. First thing, to me, that they got absolutely bang on is it is broadly compatible with 1st edition. Now, we've already discussed this, that it is a true 2nd edition of AD&D rather than 3rd being a new game claiming to be a new edition. And that compatibility is really useful. As I've said, we have played so often using 1st edition materials and just not changed them at all. There may be minor differences, but the differences are so minor that the players never noticed. That is a good thing. That is something that all new game editions should aspire to.
Yeah.
Being able to use the old material with preferably none, or if not minimum, alterations. Other games I can think of that got that wrong include things like the Battletech role-playing games, where each edition is completely different to the one before. They never managed to find one that they liked.
I've been using, or I
Shadowrun
was
4th edition, totally different system to
Yeah.
the ones before. You can see the progression through, and then suddenly we're on a different core mechanic. Stuff like that. I think it is important, especially if you're trying to keep your existing players, to romance the existing players and get them into the new, seduce them into the new edition. It's important to keep it as compatible with the earlier edition as possible, and that's something
I
AD&D 2
was
did.
trying to use, or I wasn't trying to, I was using some old scenarios, specifically Temple of Elemental Evil, which was, I believe, first ed, wasn't it?
First edition.
Which I think if I had tried to run it in second ed, I would have had a hell of an easier time. Because I was running it in third ed, which essentially meant I had the maps and some names. And pretty much everything else I had to scratch build around the framework, which was, I mean, it's not an undoable amount of work, but it's a pain in the neck because it removes a degree of spontaneity.
Yeah.
It's one of those games you really have to prep each chunk in advance.
The other big difference
detail.
there, of course, is that the level progression, character progression, changed dramatically from second to third.
Oh god, yes.
So I'm bringing this up now because this is one of the things that is a good thing about second edition in my mind, and a bad thing in the mind of many players who haven't thought it through properly. Characters in later editions progress quicker.
Yeah.
From a player's point of view, your first instinct is to say, yeah, that's really cool. I get to go up a level and get new abilities sooner. When you actually stop and think about it, however, your DM has carefully constructed your adventure. He knows that you're going from A to D, and along the way, you're going to level up. He's got all of the skills, the challenges, rather, properly sorted out. He knows that at B, you'll hit level 2. At C, you'll hit level 3. And when you've completed D, you'll be level 4. And everything is gauged accordingly. He knows where you're going. You take a side route because Bob doesn't turn up one week. So you have a side adventure, just a little encounter that lasts one scenario. You go off, you do that, you carry on. It doesn't hugely alter anything. You might hit that next level a fraction earlier during the scenario where it was expected, but still not be able to actually level up until the end of the scenario, so it doesn't matter. You do that in third edition. In those early levels, there's a very good chance that you're going to level up on the side encounter, and suddenly the next scenario needs to be adjusted because its challenges are a point too low. That is a big deal as a dungeon master. Having run first, second, and third.
You did.
I did run first. So
you did. We died.
Having run first, second, third, red box. The one that I had the hardest time actually plotting in advance was third.
Yeah.
Because taking into account character progression is so difficult in that game. And it messed up the way the scenarios are published as well. Good thing with first and second edition scenarios, they tended to be, well, for starters, they tended to be for a party of 5 to 6 because they expected a lot more players than you see these days. I think it was not unreasonable dropping the expected players to 4 at third edition because by the turn of the millennium, you weren't getting necessarily the big gaming groups that you used to get. 4 players was probably more reasonable.
Too many other recreational
options. We're talking 5 to 6
options.
players here, not 5 to 6 people around the table. It's DM running for 6 people. And they also tended to they would be for like levels 1 to 3. Third edition carried that on. You were publishing scenarios for character levels 1 to 3. The difference is that the character, a level 3 character was going to walk these scenarios. A level 2 character was going to be about right, and a level 1 character was going to really struggle. Whereas in the earlier edition, level 1 characters were still going to struggle because they had bugger all hit points. But otherwise, the difference between levels 1 and 3, not that big a deal. The level 3 character had a second level spell for the wizard. That really is the big difference. The only big difference. Nothing else went up quick enough to really matter. You got
Sorry, carry on.
computer role-playing games in some ways reflect early D&D and AD&D better than tabletop role-playing games do these days, because they quite often have a whole bunch of levels where really the only thing you get is that you get more health. There's no significant improvement of your characters. Every 4 levels you might get a new ability, and otherwise you get some extra hit points. That's kind of the way AD&D worked, but not at the rapid rate of progression that you get in these like JRPGs and whatnot.
Yeah. I will second that. I mean, I've run a lot of third. I've run a shed load of second. I've run a lot of third. And second, there's more freedom. If you want to throw in a random encounter, you want to just chuck something in that, they've been dungeon bashing. It's all got a bit samey. It's all a little bit, okay, where's the next thing to hit? And you want to break up or give them a reason to go back to town, for example, that sort of thing. You could chuck in you could discover a captive. You rescue the captive, you fight your way out of the dungeon, you do some role-playing with the captive. If you did that in 3rd Ed, you'd be looking at, well, hang on, that's an extra level of XPs I need to give them. I need to sort out role-playing XPs. Oh, shit, they've just gone up a level. Wasn't actually what I was going for.
I have on screen
now
a
I
good
need to double the number
of how this worked. Because on screen we have the Goblin from 2nd edition.
Yeah.
We will come back later to the fact that this, that you are now looking at here, this is the best monster manual layout and format ever created for any game, let alone any edition of D&D. We'll come back to that later.
Goblins look like monkeys.
Here we have our Goblin, and down at the bottom we have got an XP value for our Goblin. 15 experience points.
Yeah.
That's 150 in 3rd edition.
Yeah.
3rd edition, you level up at 1,000. The lowest of the XP requirements
1250
is 1250. That's for thieves who
Without
aren't very
looking.
good. For the big hitters, you're looking at over 2,000. You're at 2,500 for a wizard or a paladin.
Yeah.
So 2.5 times the required experience to go up a level, and the goblins worth 1/10 the XPs.
Yeah.
That tells you everything you need to know about combat XPs. Significantly, if I just double check which page, I've got a note of it. It might be page 123 of the revised player's handbook. Or it might not. It's 122. I was close.
What were you looking for?
Maybe it's not.
What are
I
you
was
after?
completely off. In fact, I remembered the wrong part. Here we go.
Okay.
Maybe. No, I've forgotten where that note actually
Hard copy
was.
right here.
That's why, because I'm trying to remember a page in the player's handbook for something that's actually in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Creating vivid combat scenes, Dungeon Master's Guide, page 72. First line of this. Since this isn't a combat game, the rules are not ultra detailed. Since this isn't a combat game,
And see as everyone's head comes off.
ask most people who play modern editions of D&D what the big difference is between the edition they play and something like AD&D, and they will probably tell you that AD&D was all about the fight, all about killing monsters and taking the treasure, and the later editions are more about the role playing. And yet, you get more XP for doing non-combat things in 2nd edition than you do for fighting, unless you're fighting really big, nasty creatures. Whereas you get negligible XP for anything except
you
fighting
finally
in
shut
3rd
up,
edition. So,
Fishy. Your hair is too long.
Hang on a sec.
I will not.
So, maybe they've got the wrong idea.
Maybe they've never read the book.
Yeah. So yeah, 15 XP for a goblin.
Which book? Which book
That
was
means
it?
that if you need to slow down your players, you say they can fight goblins. We know they can fight goblins. Goblins aren't very tough. Depending on what level the characters are, and how many of them there are, you might throw in 3 or 4 goblins. You might throw in half a dozen goblins. You might throw in 20 goblins. But if you throw in 20 goblins in any other edition, you're looking at a level up.
Yeah.
You throw in 20 goblins in first or second edition, and you've tied up the party for the rest of this game session while they kill 20 goblins, while you desperately work out what it is that they've messed up for you that requires you to delay them like this. You can't do that in the later editions.
As much as anything, you're probably tying up the party as they run away, attempt to barricade themselves in and hide.
If your party is at least 4th level, then they've got a fair whack at 20 goblins.
And then you give them bows.
I mean, I had 6th level characters who could have taken 20 goblins on their own.
Well, to be fair, I had a 3rd level character who did that with kobolds, but we gloss over that.
Yeah.
Yes. But yes, if you want them to be an increased threat, as I said, you give them short bows.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about threat here. I'm talking about exactly the opposite. You don't want them to be a threat, and you don't want them to be a big reward. You just want to be able to throw something in to delay the characters.
Yeah.
More importantly, in this instance, the example I gave, to delay the players. Because if you don't
finally shut
for
up.
some reason...
Don't
If you had
say
let
the
Fitchy
word
program
players.
me, I might work properly.
I didn't... It's nothing to do with that. He does not trigger on the word players. This is a time thing. This is a random time thing, which I still need to reprogram so that I can actually turn it off. Without turning off the voice attack entirely. So, yeah, let's say, for example, that the players have done something you really didn't expect. The classic example is the way they went the other way.
Oh, yes.
You've got everything neatly worked out. You've got your combat encounter, you've got your puzzles, you've got your traps, your riddles, you've got everything worked out for when they go left over there and they go right.
Mm-hmm.
Despite the fact you've made it very clear there is no reason to go right, you don't want them to go right. They go right anyway because they're players.
Right is the stinking swamp of doom death.
Yes. Oh, that sounds cool. Let's go there. That must be worth XP.
No, don't go there.
So what you need to do before, you're going to move everything from the left to the right, but you've got to work out where it goes. You've got to fit it in. You've got to make sure that it's there properly. That may only be 5 minutes work, in which case, cool. It may, however, take you a couple of hours of redrawing maps, in which case you're not going to be doing that in the middle of a session. You're going to want to delay them. No. You're going to want to finish up this session and then bring that changed material for next session. But you don't want to end the session early, A, because you don't want to end the session early, and B, because then that is a bit of a giveaway that they've just screwed you over by going in the wrong direction.
Yes.
So what you do instead is you throw in something that will tie up the remainder of the session. Not necessarily one encounter. It might be 2 or 3 encounters. You might reuse one of the riddles from the other side or the traps and put it in a different place. But most likely you're going to be throwing in a couple of combat encounters that combat always takes time.
I would prefer to, and I have done, God knows, they went the other way, is tattooed across my forehead. I've been known to, yes, you throw in a random number of small and inoffensive but bloody annoying things that will take time to chew through.
Yeah, precisely.
And
but when the small inoffensive things are still worth so many XPs that you've got to really worry about how many you can throw against them, that becomes a problem.
Yeah.
When they're only worth 15 XP each, you don't care. You can throw as many as you need and it'll work.
And I had a bad habit of having puzzles, a little notebook with puzzles in, that I could chuck in of varying complexity to give the room a function other than somewhere to house the garrison of inexplicable goblins who'd decided to bed down there for the night. Suddenly it wasn't just a garrison of inexplicable goblins in their boarding house. They were guarding a trap door.
Yeah.
And then, once they'd slaughtered the goblins, they still had probably an hour or so of puzzling to try and work out how to get past whatever
Yeah.
obstacle I put in their way. It actually wasn't that serious. However, it all takes time and it takes thought, but
Yeah.
they're not racking up huge numbers of XPs while doing
Yeah,
it.
and this
There's
is
no
one of the big
danger of
problems
leveling
with a
somebody
fast
up.
advancement, that you will be you have there's a domino effect that when you insert an extra domino, the knock-on effect means that you've got to readjust every domino afterwards.
Yeah.
And it's a balance thing. Some players would rather have not actually a railroading scenario, but less freedom in return for faster advancement. Because at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. The faster you advance, the less freedom you will have in your campaign, because the GM will have to determine everything far more strictly in advance. In a very free-form game, you have to have slow advancement or it doesn't work. So we've covered briefly there the second point that I wanted to make about what's good with AD&D Second Edition, and that is that its focus is less on combat, less than the later editions, but also less than First Edition. Because I'm going to actually need to check the index here in the Dungeon Master's Guide, because I haven't found this in advance. I apologise for this. I really should have done, but it's one of the things I didn't get to. There we go. Page 70 of the Dungeon Master's Guide. Individual class awards. Individual experience awards.
My favourite page.
So, we already know that a goblin is worth 15 XPs, right? And that therefore you can throw goblins in and you don't need to worry too much. Then we look at the individual class awards. A warrior, 10 XP per hit die of creature defeated. That's almost doubling the value of a goblin, because they're warriors. What do they learn from? They learn from hitting things on the head. Priest,
Plus
100
the 10% bonus?
XP for a successful use of a granted power. 50 XP per spell level for casting a spell to overcome foes or problems.
Yeah.
These are good XP levels, particularly when you compare them to that 15 XP goblin.
Correct me if I'm wrong, you're still getting the plus 10% bonus for 16 in the stat, aren't you?
And yes, you are getting the 10% bonus for the 16 in your Prime Rec in this edition.
Yeah. When doing class-related activities.
Wizards, again, 50 XPs for casting a spell to overcome a problem. How often have you seen in a game of D&D the wizard use a spell to overcome a problem? How often have you seen him get 50 XPs for it? Big difference. 500 experience per spell level for researching your own spells.
Yeah.
So that's earning XPs outside of game time, because that's happening between scenarios. You're not doing that during a game. Rogue, 200 XP per successful use of a special ability. That's every single trap you disable, every single door you open, 200 XPs a time. Your XPs are not coming from a 15 XP goblin. They're coming from the trap on the door.
Basically, Second Ed rewarded your characters for being those classes.
Yeah, they
Although
rewarded you for
I'd
playing
much
the
think-
class.
yeah.
We've already criticised the class system.
Yeah.
But if you're stuck
But
with
this
it
is
anyway,
what it got right.
this game rewarded you for playing those classes.
Yeah.
We then had the common individual awards that anyone could get. 50 to 100 for a clever idea.
Yeah. Oh, the number of those I gave out.
Yeah, that's 4 goblins per idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the
Basically.
low level. Idea that saves the party, 1 to 500. If you're a thief, that's almost half a level up.
Yeah.
Role plays the character well, 100 to 200. That's actually higher
real
than the role
incentive.
playing award in 3rd edition, despite 3rd edition having a faster progression. Encourages others to participate, 100 to 200 XP.
Yeah.
So if you've got a wallflower in your party, you're going to level. Because all you need to do is just keep saying, well, Andrea, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Andrea, doesn't your character have that skill? up you go, level after level.
Yeah.
And defeating a creature in single combat. XP value
All fun.
per creature.
Mm.
How awesome is that?
Yeah. Basically, second ed, it rewarded you for doing more than just the hack and slash. The hack and slash was the meat, I suppose. It was the potatoes. It was the boring bit. This is the spice. This is what gets you going. And this is what gets you up levels. If all you do is just me ugh, me have axe, me hack and slash, then you might get the role playing your character well, as long as you're role playing an idiot.
Yeah, if you're role playing that barbarian.
But otherwise, I didn't say barbarian.
Just had to
not all barbarians.
Onto the screen here because of exactly what you just said. There is actually this section at the beginning of the combat chapter of the Revised Player's Handbook, headed "More Than Just Hack and Slash."
In my defence, I swear to God, I was not reading that. Yeah. I've kept the book firmly closed for the most part.
This is what the book says.
Yeah.
As important as fighting is to the AD&D game, it isn't the be-all and end-all of play. It's just one way for characters to deal with situations. If characters could do nothing but fight, the game would quickly get boring, every encounter would be the same. Because there is more to the game than fighting, we'll cover much more than simple hack and slash combat in this chapter.
There you go. See, that is the correct attitude. That's the way you should be. That's the attitude that 4th edition got wrong. They focused everything on the combat.
4th edition's basically a skirmish game.
It is what seems to be a pretty good tabletop skirmish game pretending to be a role-playing game. And to be honest, I'm beginning to think the same about 5th.
I think I get wary when people start referring to DPS builds.
Yeah.
I think if you're thinking in terms of damage per second,
builds, not about character, you've lost the point of a role-playing game, which is to play a role. There's a reason why the terms that are used here all come from video gaming, and that's because they're not D&D terms. D&D had been around for 30 years before those terms came into common use. Why are they being used for D&D? And why are they being used as if they always were part of D&D, when they never used to be? That is a fundamental flaw in the way players view the game these days.
Yeah. If you're constructing based on best DPS, then you need to start thinking about what you're actually playing, and would you be happier playing a skirmish or war game?
But on the other hand, having said, there's more to D&D than just the combat. AD&D Second Edition had a very solid combat system. And let's talk about that combat system a little bit. Let's start with the single biggest change from 2nd edition to 3rd, which has carried on ever since. The combat round. A combat round in
Do you mean 1st to 2nd?
Nope, 2nd to 3rd. A combat round in 1st and 2nd edition was a minute.
Oh, yes.
60 whole seconds. 10 of those things that you're doing in 3rd edition onwards. Now, there are good and bad things to be said about 1-minute combat rounds. The first bad thing to be said about 1-minute combat rounds is that anybody who has studied any kind of martial art, whether it be armed or unarmed, knows that a minute is an entire combat. It's not one round.
Yes.
It's a fight.
Yes.
If it's not over in a minute, time to shake hands and call it a draw.
How long does a strike take, roughly?
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't been doing it, but you have actually been slightly in HEMA beginning to get into the low end of some free sparring.
Yeah.
So how many plays back and forth do you reckon you can get into a minute there?
God. Dozens. Yeah.
Or one attack.
And I'm not much cop. Yeah.
But if you think of each each contest there as being one strike, then it begins to make sense. During that minute, you're going to be posturing, you're going to be positioning, you're going to be feinting, you're going to be testing for a weakness, and eventually someone will probably get a hit in. And the whole thing is going to be over within that minute.
Yeah.
That's the point with D&D and AD&D combat in these early editions. A strike wasn't an attack. It was an opportunity to attack. You spent a minute posturing, posing, feinting, testing, generally looking for a weakness, and when you found that weakness, you rolled the die to see whether or not you actually took advantage of it or whether you messed it up and got nothing out of that minute's worth of playing around.
Yeah.
And that is what a minute combat round is about. It's not about individual blows, not by a long chalk. Nor should be a 6-second combat round. Because if you
quite a long time.
Actually look at the numbers, in a 6-second combat round, 2 skilled opponents coming at one another, you're probably looking at 4 maybe passes.
Yeah.
One person trying to get through. It might be the same one 4 times. It might be alternating. It might be one a couple of times, then one back from the other direction. But in that 6 seconds, you're looking at a to and fro, like you are with the minute, but a much shorter to and fro.
Yeah.
And again, in that 6 seconds, you're expected one of those is going to be the one that you're rolling to see if it hits. So in that respect, they stayed the same. What really did change with the 1 minute to 6 second change is that the 1 minute gives the DM a lot less to do. A lot less paperwork, a lot less thinking, a lot less hassle. Because at the end of each minute of combat, you just had to describe a general overview of a minute of combat.
Yeah.
At the end of each 6-second combat round, in the later editions, you've got to describe 6 seconds. And for 6 seconds, you're either going to come down to a really boring, you feint, then strike at him and miss, or you're doing a lot of descriptive narrative during every combat.
Yeah,
so that
hadn't thought
really
of it like that.
increases the DM's workload. The other way it increases the DM's workload is mechanically. Because things that you do not take into account for a 1 minute to and fro, you do take into account for a 6-second to and fro. The first of those, promised you I'd cover this, why is there no attack of opportunity in 2nd edition?
Yeah.
Answer is, there is.
Okay.
I will...
Explanation needed.
Yeah. Thing is, the attack of opportunity in 2nd edition is conceptual, not mechanical. And I will explain this to you. I'm going to read this myself rather than let Lazarus do it, because Lazarus will mess it up. We are describing the action in a combat round here. What is a combat round? How does it work out? Imagine the simple act of imbibing a healing potion. First, a character decides to drink the potion before retiring for the night. All he has to do is get it out of his backpack, uncork it, drink the contents. No problem. Now imagine the same thing in the middle of a fight. The potion is safely stowed in the character's backpack. First, he takes stock of the situation to see if anyone else can get the potion out for him. But not surprisingly, everyone is rather busy. So, sword in one hand, he shrugs one strap of the pack off his shoulder. Then, just as 2 orcs leap towards him, the other strap threatens to slip down, entangling his sword arm. Already, the loose strap keeps him from fully using his shield. Holding the shield as best as possible in front of him, he scrambles backwards to avoid the monster's first wild swings. He gets pushed back a few more feet when a companion shoulders past to block their advance. His companion bought him a little time, so he kneels, laying down his sword, and slips the backpack all the way off. Hearing a wild cry, he instinctively swings his shield up just in time to ward off a glancing blow. Rummaging through the pack, he finally finds the potion, pulls it out, and, huddling behind his shield, works the cork free. Just then, there's a flash of flame all around him, a fireball. He grits his teeth against the heat, shock, and pain, and tries to remember not to crush or spill the potion vial. Biting back the pain of the flames, he's relieved to see the potion is still intact. Quickly, he gulps it down, reclaims his sword, kicks his backpack out of the way, and runs back up to the front line. In game terms, the character withdrew, was missed by one attacker, made a successful saving throw versus spell, drank a potion, and was ready for combat the next round. All that. And it just came down to you could do exactly the same amount in one 6-second combat round in 3rd edition. Except unless you actually bother to break it down the way that has just been done there, in which case you can't anymore. When somebody takes a potion in 3rd edition, what happens is they say, I take a potion. And the GM says, attack of opportunity. So instead they say, I take a 5-foot step back, take a potion. Then they realise taking a potion is a move equivalent action, which you can do as well as a 5-foot step. So they say, I attack, take a 5-foot step back, take a potion. All this in 6 seconds compared to what we've just heard. Till the GM actually starts to think things through, in which case he says, right, you attack, you take a 5-foot step back. Where's your potion? It's in my backpack. Okay, so your move equivalent action is to take your backpack off next round.
Yeah.
Next round, move equivalent action, take the potion out of the backpack. Still haven't taken it. You now have a choice.
If you're feeling evil, then intelligence check to find it fast.
Yeah. You now have a choice.
Or a search check.
Even if you're not being evil. You now have a choice. You go back into combat, you hit something, or you use your standard action as a move equivalent action to take the potion. And you've just used a round and a half to take the potion that your GM had previously let you take in the same round as attacking someone.
Yeah.
Because this time the GM has thought about what you're actually doing.
Yeah. It makes a huge difference.
You don't have to think about that when you're in a 1-minute combat round. A 1-minute combat round is enough to do it. The attacks of opportunity are implicit. They're not a thing that happens because you didn't back off before you tried to take your potion. The backing off and coming back in are a part of the potion taking when you're dealing with a 1-minute combat round.
Yeah.
So what they've done is skipped the attack of opportunity and gone straight to the mechanism by which you avoid it, which is there anyway. The attacks are conceptual. They're the reason it takes you a full minute rather than a thing that gets rolled against you. So as I said, attacks of opportunity do exist, but they are conceptual, and therefore they are not mechanically needed in this edition. They would be overkill in this edition. They were brought in the Player's Options Combat book, but that's also the book that introduced the 6-second combat round. Attacks of opportunity were brought in at the point where if you used that optional system, you were in a 6-second combat round.
I did not know that.
Then carried over. Well, I didn't know that till recently because I didn't own it back in the day. But I picked one up second-hand recently, and I was looking through it and said, look at that. There's a lot of very familiar 3rd edition rules there being introduced towards the end of 2nd edition.
Yeah. With the experience I've now got, I would hate to try and just count how many passes theoretically you could have. Yeah. But equally, I know that less against the other inexperienced person, but when I was attempting free play against the instructor, very carefully, there was so much feeling out what you could do. And there, I can see the 1-minute combat round is absolutely accurate.
You're only probably going to have 3 or 4 passes during that minute.
Yeah.
The rest of it is all manoeuvring and feeling things out.
Yeah.
It's not the frenetic combat that later editions of the game give you.
You'll end up in 2 binds, and eventually you might be able to snipe a hit. But
next good thing about this very sound combat system from 2nd edition. Let's talk about initiative.
Yeah.
There is a myth about initiative in Dungeons & Dragons. There is a myth that re-rolling initiative every round, like we do, is a house rule.
No, it isn't.
No, it's a house rule in the later editions. Let me just let Lazarus read the words of the rulebook again.
The initiative roll determines who acts first in any given combat round. Initiative is not set, but changes from round to round, combat being an uncertain thing, at best. A character never knows for certain if he will get to act before another.
The thing that we always house ruled that stayed rather than going in the later editions.
Individual
was
initiative.
Individual initiatives, yeah. They're an optional rule. You roll for the side normally. But the rolling every round, that was standard in the earlier editions. It was later on that went away in order to speed up combat. But it doesn't make sense. Again, you do HEMA. You've done a bit of free sparring. You know that initiative moves back and forth.
It does,
between people. At any given time, either no one will have the initiative because you've both backed off and are feeling things out, then someone will take the initiative. But it's not that I have the initiative, I will always have the initiative, this will never change, which is the way the rules present it later on. It's right now I have the initiative. Who will have the initiative next round? It might be me or it might be you. It depends on any number of factors. It depends, for example, on does a door bang and distract you, giving me an opportunity and thus the initiative? Do I trip over my shoelace, giving you an opportunity and thus the initiative? Initiative represents a whole bunch of random elements, not just are my reflexes quicker than you? And that's why there's a die roll. That's why it's not always using the same initiative values. Some games do that. Some games have a set initiative value and you always act in that order. D&D never has. It's always understood that there's a random element to it. But unfortunately, it forgot later on that random element, being random, changes with each round. So that's one thing that I really like about the initiative system in 2nd edition. It rolls every round. Something I like less, it's rolled per group. But, as I said, optional rules. Great believers in optional rules in this edition. So, we have got initiative modifiers. We've got initiative modifiers that affect a party, and we've got initiative modifiers that affect a person. And we have the initiative rolls. Group initiative, optional rule. Some people believe that using a single initiative roll for everyone on the same side is too unrealistic. So, they're saying straight away, they're saying that already is a simplification.
Yeah.
A way to keep the number of die rolls required in a single round, allowing for much faster combat. The actions of different characters, the types of weapons they use, and the situations can all be factors in determining initiative. They're upfront about that. They say that, so they give you a way of doing things. Optional method 1, you still make a single initiative roll, but each person applies their individual modifiers.
Okay,
so
I haven't heard that one.
The whole party, that's the standard individual initiative rule from 2nd edition. It's never been the one we used, but it is the standard one. So the whole party is going to be faster or slower, but then the individual people are faster or slower based on their modifiers within that. The second way of doing it, that's what they call group initiative, even though it's making individual modifiers.
Okay.
True individual initiative is the one that we always use. Individual initiative, everybody gets their own role and applies the modifiers. These are optional rules. You don't have to use them if you don't want to use them. You don't even have to use them consistently. You and I, for example, have always used individual initiative for player characters and varied whether we use it for monsters.
Yeah,
Small number
it
of
depends.
monsters, give them their own initiative. Big group of monsters, roll once. Or split them into smaller groups, roll once for each group.
Yes.
It's a logical extension of the optionals that they're giving us here. Another thing I like about this combat, which ties to initiative, is the way multiple attacks work.
Yeah.
In order to get multiple attacks in 3rd edition, you need to use the full attack action. So on your action, you declare a full attack, and you can then use weapon in each hand, 2 attacks because you're high enough level, whatever it may be. Multiple attacks and initiative in earlier systems didn't do that because things like full attack actions, move actions, didn't really exist. The 1-minute combat round doesn't really allow for them. So instead, we have the following.
When multiple attacks are the result of different attack forms, claws and a bite or bite and tail, or a ranger with his two-weapon combat ability for example, the attacks all occur at the same time. The creature resolves all of its attacks in initiative order. When the attacks are true multiples, using the same weapon more than once, as in the case of a highly skilled fighter, the attacks are staggered. Everyone involved in the combat completes one action before the second, or subsequent, attack roll is made.
Again,
Yeah.
neat, logical, makes sense. Why
Yeah.
is it, particularly in a 6-second combat round, that both your opportunities to strike with your longsword come at the same time?
Yeah. No, they wouldn't.
You go 1 second, 2 second, 3 second, strike twice on second 4, 5 second, 6 second. That doesn't
no.
make sense. You could almost accept it in a minute combat round, but in a 6-second combat round, you really want the other guys to make their attack before you get your second one in. So that was another house rule that we've been known to use in later editions. And the reason we've done it is because we were used to using it from second, and it made sense. Everybody gets their first attack. If you haven't got a second attack, that's it. Your round is over. If you have got a second attack, go back to the beginning of the initiative order, and everyone with a second attack takes that one. Unless, of course, as it said, you're attacking with, for example, 2 claws or a sword in each hand. Those take place at the same time. Now, actually, the sword in each hand at the same time thing is a rather contentious issue, but we're going to assume for the moment that it's acceptable. Logic would actually be that you'd make those attacks with the 2 weapons at different times, but we won't go into that. And yeah, you get the traditional claw bite D&D. 3 attacks, all a different weapon, therefore all taking place at the same time.
Yeah. And anyone who argues that, I would say, annoy your cat.
Yeah, absolutely.
And see how you get on with that.
I mean, they do go on and they give an example of a fighter battling creatures that can only make 1 attack, but he can attack twice per round. He wins initiative, takes his first attack according to the rolled initiative order, then each creature gets its attack, then he gets his second one.
Okay, second.
So
yeah, which makes sense.
In the 3rd edition, if he hit well enough, he could kill them both before either gets to attack, because he gets both of his attacks before them.
Yeah.
In 3rd edition. In 2nd edition, he can kill one of them maybe, then the other one will get to attack because he's wasted his time killing the first one. He's left himself open. He has, in essence, allowed an attack of opportunity, conceptually.
Yeah.
Then he gets his second attack to finish off the other one. So all ties in together. As I said, attacks of opportunity being conceptual, they feature there as well if you actually think about the logic behind the way these work. And that's an important point, I think, about the design of 2nd edition AD&D. It's not just mechanical logic of how the dice work. It's the logic of what's actually happening.
Yeah,
and
it's
if you
reality.
can get both of those things right, then you're going to get a good system. In places, it only gets one or the other right. Sometimes the logic of the situation is good, but the mechanical logic is poor. Sometimes the other way around. Sometimes, like there, they both gel and it just works. Let's see, back to the DMG page 72, because again, there is a note here which it's a good thing because it's good GM advice rather than a good thing because it's a part of the system.
Okay.
That's still something that you do have to judge again by how good is the DM advice or the GM advice in this game. Does it actually teach you how to play properly? And the answer is, in this case, quite often, yes. How much fun is it when a character ready to try an amazing and heroic deed is told, you can't do that because it's against the rules?
Mm-hmm.
This, I've said before, there is a big argument, goes on a lot in the gaming world, over rules versus narrative. And I've always maintained that the argument is misdirected because, for the most part, rules make narrative. So they're not at all in conflict. This is the correct way the correct interpretation, which leads to that failed interpretation of rules versus narrative. Too many rules slow down play, taking away from the real adventure, and restrict imagination. Then it goes on how much fun about being told you can't do that, it's against the rules. This is the way narrative fails where rules are concerned, is that it slows down play. So it's too many rules rather than detailed rules.
Okay.
In this case, they've got it right. They're saying we've kept the rules relatively loose because that way you can play quickly and you can have fun. But they're not absent, they're just loose. It then goes on to say players should be allowed to try whatever they want, especially if what they want will add to the spirit of adventure and excitement. Yes, absolutely bang on with that. But again, it's something people take too far. They forget the next line. Just remember that there is a difference between trying and succeeding.
Yes.
Just because the players are allowed to try it doesn't mean you have to let them succeed.
No.
You can, you can tell them it's going to be really difficult. And if they still want to roll it, that's entirely up to them. The point is you haven't stopped them from doing it. You haven't said, no, you can't do that. You've said that's going to be really hard. And if they try it anyway, maybe they'll get the nat 20 that they need. Who knows?
Yeah. There is an element where you're not allowed to tell the players no these days.
Yeah,
At all.
there's a thing from improv that is misused, which is you never say no. The idea with improvisation, improvisational theatre, particularly improvisational comedy, is you never say no, you never shut anything down. You might say yes, but you run with it and you build on it. That's fine if you are in a cooperative improvisational situation. A role-playing game is not entirely cooperative. Particularly in combat, it is by its very nature a combative improvisational situation. As the GM, you're not supposed to be on the side of the villains, but you are still representing their interests. So you have got to be doing what will work for the combat, not what will work for the players. And you have got to shut down anything that won't work, and in particular anything that is stupid. If somebody wants to try something that's really, really unlikely, they're entitled to try that. You make it clear to them it's really, really unlikely. If they want to roll it anyway, they roll it anyway. But if somebody wants to try something that's
impossible.
Yeah, if somebody wants to try something impossible, how do you not say no to that? Yeah. I want to suddenly levitate across the room, becoming intangible so that all the attacks miss me, and then plunge my knife into the head of the lead ogre. How do you not say no to that?
Yeah.
The only way to not say no to that is, okay, you can try that.
Yeah, you can. My
then,
famous.
Then when it comes around to their initiative, you say nothing happens, and move on to the next person. They've wasted their turn.
Yeah.
But most people would interpret that as saying no, and say you're not supposed to do that, and you get into this whole weird. Well, you want me to break the game? So, I mean, that's nothing to do with AD&D Second Edition. That's just a general thing about gaming. But I think the GM advice, the DM advice in this doesn't trend towards that kind of thing. It is more sensible than that. They say to have the most fun playing the AD&D game, don't rely on the rules. Like so much in a good role-playing adventure, combat is a drama, a staged play. The DM is both the playwright and the director, creating a theatrical combat. If a character wants to try wrestling a storm giant to the ground, let him. And a character who tries leaping from a second-floor window onto the back of a passing orc is adding to everyone's fun. These are reasonable examples of things that you might try to do. But, as they specified earlier, there's a difference between trying and succeeding. That character wrestling the storm giant is likely to find himself clinging onto a storm giant's leg, pulling for all he's worth and getting nowhere. The guy leaping out of the second-floor window may take down the orc, but he may also land in a well.
Mm-hmm.
No guarantees for anything. And the result that you're getting has to be both dramatic and reasonable. You are the playwright and the director. This advice works. We like
Yeah.
that. The trick to making combat vivid is to be less concerned with the rules than with what is happening at each instant of play. And this is the point. It's what's happening. It's not anything is happening. It's what is happening. If combat is only I hit, I miss, I hit again, then something is missing. Combat should be more like one orc ducks under the table jabbing at your legs with his sword. The other tries to make a flying tackle but misses and sprawls to the floor in the middle of the party. This takes description, timing, strategy, humour, and perhaps most of all, knowing when to use the rules and when to bend them. But what's important about this, from my point of view, with regards to the whole rule versus narrative thing, is it's knowing when to use them and when to bend them. It's not throwing them out so that they will never get in the way, which is too often the way it's done now. Probably enough on combat.
Yes, definitely enough on combat.
So shall
Unless
we
you
go
wanted
back?
to cover Thaco.
Oh, of course, yes. Thaco. Let's just briefly talk about Thaco.
Because we've been going for a couple of hours now.
Yep, we have indeed. So, THACO is an acronym for to hit armor class 0. This is the number a character, NPC or monster needs to attack an armor class 0 target successfully. THACO depends on a character's group and a level or a monster's hit dice. The THACO number can be used to calculate the number needed to hit any armor class. THACO is refigured each time a character increases in level. Using THACO speeds the play of combat greatly. So many people reckon they can't understand THACO. They couldn't understand THACO. And so many people who have never played with THACO will
Assume it's complicated.
will say, oh God, I'm so glad THACO doesn't exist. Well, I've got news for you guys. THACO does exist. They stopped calling it that. THACO and to hit, the term used in D&D 3, mean exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
A to hit roll in D&D 3, you roll your d20 and you add your to hit modifier. The resulting number is the armor class that you have hit. Yes? Nice and clear.
Yeah.
THACO is to hit armor class 0. So you subtract the other character's armor class from THACO to give you the number you need to roll. In both cases, one, you're making a roll and comparing it to a number. The other, you're making a number and comparing it to a roll. They're the same thing. Write them as algebra. You can mix and match them. You can convert one into the other. They are the same thing. Only difference is that one goes down and the other goes up.
Yep. But people panic.
I mean, the whole armor class 0, this thing of why is it based on armor class 0? God, that's so complicated basing it on armor class 0. What? It is. D&D 3, it's based on armor class 0.
Yeah.
Except they call armor class 0 10.
Yes.
For no good reason. There's a mechanical reason. I know exactly what the mechanical reason is. But it doesn't actually make sense it only makes sense if you look under the hood. So, why is armor class 0 armor class 10? Armor class 10 is the worst armor class you can be. What about 1 to 9? Where did they go? What happens there? They vanished. It's a bit weird, isn't it? Like, why can you not be armor class 9? I want to be armor class 9, please.
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense. And the reason for it is because 10 is a nice average roll. If you have
Yes.
0 base attack bonus and you're rolling against
Most
armor
first
class
levels.
10, then you hit 50% of the time, which is what they were going for. You look under the hood,
Yeah.
that's the reason for armor class 10. That's the only reason for armor class 10. It's the only point where it makes any sense at all. Everywhere else it's nonsense. THACO works the other way around. They don't look at what's the easiest roll. They look at what's the most difficult roll. If you take a first level character, he will have a THACO of 20. Armor class 0 is not actually the best armor class, but it's sort of deemed best-ish.
It's
armor
very
class.
good.
Really, really good, yeah. Anything negative numbers is awesome. So, an unarmored person, armor class 10. Except that it makes sense in this version because you count up to it and you never go higher than 10. That's as bad as it gets. There's the other reason why armor class 10 is armor class 10 in D&D 3rd edition. Mechanically, it's to give you a 50-50 chance. Nostalgically, it's so that it matches Armor Class 10 from 1st and 2nd edition, even though none of the other numbers will match. So when you subtract your Armor Class 10 unarmored pleb from your THAC-O 0, THAC-O 20 rather, what do you get? You get 10.
Yeah. Giving
you a 50-50 chance of hitting. It's exactly the same calculation.
Yeah.
THAC-O's a doddle. You can even work the other way round, and most players do. You can work it the same way it's done in 3rd edition. 3rd edition, you roll and determine what armor class you've hit. Most players will do that in 2nd edition, because the DM isn't going to tell you. You leap towards the orc. As a player, you may know that his hide armor is probably armor class 6.
Yeah.
In which case, you know that with your THAC-O 20, you need 14 to hit him. But he may have magic. He may have a dex bonus. You don't know that he's armor class 6. He could be armor class something else. And the DM isn't going to tell you. So instead, what you do is you say, right, I'm THAC-O 20. I roll my d20. I get a 15. Take that off the 20. I've hit armor class 5, please. Is that good enough? That's exactly the same calculation as rolling and adding to hit. You're just rolling and subtracting instead.
Yeah.
It's not difficult. Unless subtraction is more difficult than addition. And since they're the same thing, that's unlikely. It's just subtraction is just addition done backwards. Or possibly it's Australian addition, is when you're standing on your head.
Somebody should have come and told me when I was about 7.
But no, I mean,
that subtraction was addition done backwards.
Mathematically, subtraction and addition are, of course, the same thing. Because add 5 or add minus, just subtract 5 or add minus 5 are the same thing.
Yeah,
and
same
again,
deal.
Yeah, subtract 5 or... It's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So THAC-O is a doddle. THAC-O is no harder. THAC-O is lovely. We love THAC-O. Plus, THAC-O gives you a really cool acronym. To hit doesn't.
No.
And nor does base attack bonus. No one can get excited over BAB. It sounds like either you're talking to a small child, possibly up north, or maybe you want to add a KE at the beginning of it and eat it. THAC-O, on the other hand, THAC-O's cool. And you can boast about your THAC-O. You can't really boast about to hit. Oh, I've got a +4 to hit. That's a bit bland. I've got THAC-O 16. That's cool. That is another reason we like 2nd edition.
Yep. Okay. Moving on.
Skills. We said we were going to talk about these because we said they were bad. We also said that they were actually quite good, and when we get to good, we're going to talk about them. So, what's good about the non-weapon proficiency system in 2nd edition AD&D? We already know that... Well, let's detail it a little bit for people who don't know 2nd edition.
Yeah.
When you learn a non-weapon proficiency, and you will start with a number of non-weapon proficiencies at 1st level and gain one every few levels. So it's not like 3rd edition where you gain several skill points per level. Instead, you will gain one proficiency per several levels. So the rate of progression is really fundamentally massively slow. But when you gain a non-weapon proficiency, you are proficient in it. You don't have 1 point, somebody once read a book on it near you, and by osmosis you learned a little bit. You're not saying, oh, the difficulty to perform this task is 23 and I've got a +1 skill.
Yeah.
Your chance of succeeding is based on your attribute, so on your ability score. So if you have an average ability score, you've already got a 50-50 chance of succeeding at that skill, that non-weapon proficiency. If you're buying the right non-weapon proficiencies and your fighter has strength-based stuff, then you're succeeding on 17 or less, which is an awesomely good chance.
That is pretty damn good, yes.
If you want to improve that, you can buy the proficiency again at a later date. When you get more proficiencies, you take it again and you add 1. Slow progression compared to getting an entirely new thing at sort of, 12, 13, 14. But if you really want to be good at something, that's the way you do it. So that's the way proficiencies work. They're not, here is a selection of skills I know a little bit of. They are, here are the things that I can do well. And in time, I'll learn to do other things well. But at the moment, this is what I can do.
But no, it's not everything that you could do.
Yeah, and this is a reflection of a change in attitude to player characters. Third edition even, did away with level 0 creatures. First and second edition had this very odd concept, which is fundamentally wrong, but it was a part of the way the game was built, and you accepted it, that most of the people in the world were level 0. So you walk down the street, there is a merchant there, you decide you don't want to pay him for his goods, and you attack him instead. He's level 0, he's got at best 6 hit points.
Yeah.
He can't fight, he's utterly crap, you can kill him with both hands tied behind your back while wearing a blindfold. Because you're a player character. You have a class. Anyone with a class, anyone at least level 1, is significant. So when you're 14 and you're setting out from your village for the first time as a Poxy level 1, and everyone who's played to any higher level is laughing at you for being level 1, you're already better than 90% of the world.
It is worth knowing.
Even being that crap compared to the other player characters, you are already better than 90% of the world. And this is a significant shift. First level characters were first level in the later editions. First level characters were first level in second edition. And as a result, you already had these skills. The skills were good because you already knew how to do things. You were a well-rounded individual. And later on, you'd become even better. So what this did is it created entire people. And this is one of the things I like. This is one of the things I think is good about the non-weapon proficiency system, is it created entire people. If you had ride horse, land-based riding.
Yeah.
What that gave you is the ability to do things like hang off the side of your saddle to avoid archery fire, jump over shit, spur your horse on to greater speeds, stuff that needs a much higher skill rank than you'll have at first level in a later edition, but that you got straight away because you either had them or you didn't in second edition. So first level characters out of combat weren't as wussy. They were way more competent. It's only when you got to combat that first level characters became wussy, because they had low hit points, low TACO 20, didn't have the right gear, didn't have many spells. But in normal stuff, non-magic, non-combat stuff, a first level character is really competent in this edition. And so as a game that is more than just hack and slash, that is more than just combat, and that wants to give you XPs for doing things without hitting something with a sword, this system creates really good characters, really playable characters that will work for a lot of situations and a lot of fun. And that's why I like this edition. That's why I like this edition's skills.
I think I was slightly worried when I was first presented with the list of non-weapon proficiencies. My first response was, where's the rest of it? Because I didn't realise just how broad they were. I was really new to gaming at that point. I'd only played things that had actual skills, defined skills, and it was a very different take. But no, you get a far broader idea of what your character can do, and if they've got a non-weapon proficiency, then they're damn good at it already.
Yeah.
Their stat may be shite, so they may have
Look
trained
at
a lot.
the non-weapon proficiency groups. So, for example, agriculture. That's pretty broad. That would probably be a profession and a craft in D&D 3. Profession being the basic agriculture, and craft being for more specific things. You could legitimately argue, for example, plant husbandry or animal husbandry. But agriculture is probably going to give you that here. Costs you 1 slot, and its ability check is equal to your intelligence. So most characters are going to have a decent chance of succeeding in that.
Yeah.
Blacksmithing. Ability check, strength. Your fighter is good with a hammer.
Yeah, makes sense.
mining, riding land-based wisdom +3. Clerics are the ultimate equestrians. Seems to
They're also good with
tailor
animals
swimming.
overall. Looking at the animal handling.
Yeah, again, animal handling wisdom -1. Animal training wisdom
Forgery.
0.
Forgery and gem cutting. Dexterity. So long as you trust the thief with the gems, they're the ones who can make it into jewelry for you.
And they will be doing so from first level at a level, at a proficiency that would require them to gain several levels in a later edition before they would get that good at it. Likewise, musical instrument, dexterity at -1. So for a bard, you're probably starting playing your musical instrument at a skill of about 14. Somewhere around there.
Bowyer Fletcher. A dexterity-based warrior skill. So Ranger can go straight in and be decent at making their own arrows.
Your wizard's spellcraft skill is intelligence -2. If you've got an 18 intelligence wisdom, because you probably have.
Wizard even, not wisdom.
Wisdom, yeah. If you've got an intelligence 18 wizard, which you probably have,
Yeah.
you've got a 16 skill.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive. That's, 60% chance of success?
Yeah.
It's rather better than the 4, I suppose 8 that you would have. Still got 16 instead of 8. Based on...
Yeah. And I thoroughly approve of the paying an extra slot if you wanted to cross-class.
Yes. Now, cross-class...
which Third Ed, of course,
exists, of course, by making you pay more.
Yeah.
And this did pretty much the same thing. It was an extra slot. The groups are quite broad.
Yeah.
Anyway. But if, for example, your rogue wanted to learn spellcraft because you wanted to be able to identify magical traps, then that would just cost you an extra slot. It would cost you 2 instead of 1.
Yeah.
Nice, simple system. You can pick them very quickly in a hurry if you've got this page of the book in front of you.
Incredibly
you can just
useful.
buzz down and quickly decide your proficiencies. You don't even necessarily need to make note of the numbers. You can just say, "Oh, I've got etiquette, heraldry, fire building, and local history." And later on, when you need them, you can look up what the actual roles are. Because unless you've taken an extra slot in them, it's always going to be what it says in the book.
Yep. So, that is a good thing.
So yes, that is a good thing. I do like proper skill systems. Proper skill systems are really good. However, proper skill systems do not blend well with level-based systems. The reason why most skill-based games don't have levels and that most level-based games don't really have skills properly is because they don't match well.
No.
Either,
it's really one or the other.
Yeah. Either you level up, your skills improve automatically as you level, as in, for example, the Palladium system, where whenever you learn a skill, you will get it at a level of X plus X per level, or X plus Y per level, in fact.
Yep.
And then, you know what your skill is because you're level 3 and you started with 15% plus 2 per level, so therefore you must be now 19%. Or you have to have, like D&D 3, a system whereby at each level you gain X points of skills to spread around, which is really the same thing. It's the leveling up your skills as you level. It's just giving you a choice of how they level. Or the other alternative, which I've never seen done in a tabletop game, I'm not saying it hasn't been, but I've never seen it, is that you go backwards. You do it the way the earlier Elder Scrolls games, in fact, I think all except ASO possibly, I haven't played Skyrim, do things.
Yeah.
Which is that you level up when your skills have improved. It's a very neat system that each class in the Elder Scrolls games has a set of core skills. When you have gained enough levels split between those core skills, enough ranks between those core skills, that will level you up. So it's the same system going backwards. You level because your skills have gone up rather than your skills going up because you've leveling. It's still doesn't necessarily work, because in the same way that I hit lots of orcs in the head with an axe and suddenly I can cook, doesn't make sense. I can cook really well, so I'm better at hitting things with an axe, also doesn't make sense. But then at the same time, of course, Elder Scrolls also actually has weapon skills, which D&D has never had. Once you put weapon skills in, things change.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I think
so
we've covered most of why we like, or why I like, AD&D Second Edition, and I've done most of the talking. So, Drut, is there something you want to say about AD&D Second Edition and how cool it is?
Well, the reason that I let you do most of the talking is A, you were pretty much covering what I had in my head, and B, you do like to hold forth.
And sometimes fifth and sixth.
And sometimes fifth and sixth, and sometimes it's fish slice to get in sideways. However, broadly speaking, I think that Second Ed gives you a fluid combat system with a realist. The 60 seconds makes so much more sense than 6, and is a lot easier to GM.
It depends how you want to handle it, but certainly, D&D was never intended to have a small combat round. It is a radical change in the way combat is handled to give it a 6-second combat round, but which is why when it happened because the whole game had been rebuilt from the ground up.
Yeah, I think the slower rate of progression makes each level up an event. It is something to work towards. It is an achievement. Leveling up in Third Ed, it happens a lot, and you're always thinking ahead to, okay, what am I doing next level? Huge swathes where you might have ultimate character goals. At some point I want to take this in Second Ed, but I'm not going to be able to do that for probably another 3 months of play.
That got replaced with the prestige class thing in Third Edition. You're leveling up quite quickly. Your abilities as a fighter, rogue, whatever, are changing quite quickly. So the thing that has to be in the future that you're looking forward to one day is getting a prestige class.
Yeah. They needed to give you something to look forward to. But overall, I just find there's more freedom in Second Edition because it's less not bogged down. It is less concerned with bookkeeping and numbers. Once you've sorted out your numbers, they're not likely to change in a hurry. So I think for introducing new players, that's an excellent way of doing it.
We played for years with a single-page character sheet playing Second Edition. Most of my character sheets that I've created for Third have between 4 and 6 sheets. On the subject of less paperwork, less bookkeeping.
I was playing a druid, and she was on, I think, 6 sheets, 6 sides, because of her spells, because of her abilities, because of her animal companions. Looking up your inventory, suddenly it's flick, 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 flick. I'll get back to you in a minute. Flick, flick, flick. Back the other way. I think it's an excellent game for getting new players in. Unfortunately, it no longer forms a good bridge to the later games because, except for the stats having the same names and a lot of the classes having the same names, I don't think it's as good a bridge as it used to be.
The way in which they work is
it's very different. Yeah, and particularly, I think people coming from Third, or less Third, actually Fifth, coming back to Second Ed might be slightly stymied because it doesn't work at all the same way.
Well, for starters, their favourite races and classes won't be there.
No, very much not. You could play Tieflings. I've got Second Ed rules for Tieflings.
They were introduced.
I've got Planescape.
They were introduced in Planescape. That was
Yep.
where the Tiefling first turned up, and they're the only Tieflings worth playing. Because they're the ones where each Tiefling is unique.
Yeah.
They technically
always
still
included
were in 3rd edition, but in 3rd edition, Tieflings really had no support. It was in 4th edition where they then came in as core, and they had suddenly stabilized. Their background changed. They're no
Yep.
longer the same thing that they used to be. And their abilities and appearance stabilized. So they're not the same Tieflings. They just have the same name. They're not the same race at all. And they're far less interesting. Same goes for Dragonborn, of course.
Yeah.
That's it, Dragonborn.
And I think there's and I think there's just such a vast wealth of material for 2nd edition that is still to be touched on. If you're playing in Waterdeep, it is really unlikely you are going to exhaust the possibilities of Waterdeep in a campaign. You might touch on them. You get a good feeling for the city, but you're not going to do everything there is to do.
No, not by a long shot.
I feel that the later editions are far more self-contained, and I think that's why the term campaign has really been downgraded to extended scenarios, linked scenarios.
Something that I was going to say. Yeah, that's again down to the progression thing, because what would be deemed a campaign now, and will often take you to level sort of 15 or 20 and round off your characters, and then you start again with new characters, would probably have run you through about 6 levels in something like 2nd edition, and then led you to another campaign with the same characters, or not another campaign. In those days, we would call the whole thing a campaign. Another group of scenarios.
Yeah.
There's a reason why scenarios were often published in 3s back in those days. For example, the Saltmarsh scenarios: Sinister Secret at Saltmarsh, Danger at Dunwater, and The Final Enemy. 3 modules running over. Let me just remind myself quickly. I know the first one was levels 1 to 3. I think the second one was levels 1 to 3 as well. I'm not sure whether they'd adjusted it by the third one, but since I own them all in PDF, because TSR, Wizards, whoever, were nice enough to give them to us, by which I mean publish them, not give them.
Yeah.
U1 to 3, U3, where's U3? There's U3. Just opening the wrong folder, the wrong file there. That's the D20 conversion of it. That's the actual module. Character levels 3 to 5. So there you go. What we've got here is a trilogy of adventures running you from level 1 to level 5, maybe. But that's character levels 3 to 5. That's not necessarily assuming that you're going to be level 5 if you start the first one at level 1. In the same way that level 1, the first book, character levels 1 to 3, doesn't mean if you go in at level 1 you're coming out at level 3. You're probably coming out at level 2. Going into the second one at level 2. Coming out probably at level 3, in which case you're level 3 when you're doing this one. But that is a complete trilogy of scenarios. They are nicely written. They're not short. They're good length dungeon bashes. Looking for a map. Maybe it's at the front. There we go. There's level 1 of the dungeon, level 2 of the dungeon, level 3 of the dungeon, and it has wilderness stuff around it, to get to it in the first place. So you've got there, and that's just one of the 3. It's the third part of the 3 things. Those 3, if you publish them now, would be deemed a campaign, and would probably be slightly rejigged and take you up to, as I say, probably about 15th level, something like that. And probably mark the end of your characters' careers when you've completed them, because there's not much further to go after that. Here, you're coming out at level 3 with another 17 levels to go, and you move on to the next set of scenarios, probably also a trilogy. And as a result, each individual player character, you talk to a first edition player about his classic campaigns, his character will have achieved a lot more than the characters being played by later edition players, simply because they had that opportunity to do more things rather than leveling up and stopping.
It encouraged you to develop the character, to develop the relationships the characters had with each other, with ongoing NPCs. I mean, if you're based in a town for 3 levels of second ed, if you're based in a town for 3 levels of third ed or fifth, as we saw with Phandelver, you barely touch on who's
That's
there. You might use some of the
yeah.
shops. Yeah. If you're based in the town for 3 levels of second ed, while you're sorting out local problems,
Yeah, you're getting to know people.
the odds are, you're going to end up possibly married to the barkeep's daughter or something. You've got that level of character development there if you want it. And it makes life so much easier because you're not having to come up with a generic town number 3 every couple of weeks. You can put some effort as a GM into defining the setting.
Something we were going to come back to and forgot to. So let's talk about it now.
Slot it in quickly.
Monstrous Compendium.
Monstrous Compendium.
Best monster manual ever.
I cannot argue.
For a number of reasons. Wonderfully innovative, although the innovation was abandoned later and didn't resurface, in that they were produced as loose leaf pages in a binder. So this had the advantage that while you may have 3 large 3-ring binders full of monsters, not thinking of anyone in particular who has that.
Where is it? Behind you?
Yeah. If you knew in advance what you were doing, you could just take the individual pages out, and there you are. You've got a page that you can have on the table in front of you, not the whole binder or book. That's a really nice idea. To make that work, of course, this meant that it was 1 entry per page. No entries that scroll over to the next page, causing you to need to page flip in the middle of a fight. No cramming everything in that way as much as possible to make the book as small as possible to keep the costs of printing it down but still charge you a small fortune. My biggest disappointment when I went to 3rd edition was when I looked at the monster manual. I looked at it and I said, what the hell is this? This is terrible. This has monsters that just suddenly start halfway down the second column of a page and then vanish over and go somewhere else, and it's just not a good monster manual.
Yeah, that's a pain in the neck, that really is.
This one, each page is an entry. An entry may not be 1 creature, it may be more than 1 creature, but each page is an entry. So here we have our goblin. If I just remove the Alfie Protocols logo for a moment so that it can be seen more clearly as soon as I find the damn Alfie Protocols in OBS.
Roll over, it's your friend.
I'm obviously blind spotting here.
But it's not like I can do it.
There it is, found it. Right, so top right we've got a picture of a goblin, obviously.
Yep.
Best thing ever. Have to flip back and show you. It's not flip back, it's going... Where? Actually, yeah, I went the wrong way. I wanted I, didn't I? I forgot the name of the creature for a moment there.
Yes. No, I've just remembered what you're talking
there
about.
There it is, Invisible Stalker.
Yeah.
Best illustration of an invisible stalker ever. Love that.
Yes.
So to the left of that, we've got that little sort of snap block type thing that all of the editions have had in some way, shape or form. This one's virtually identical to 1st edition, so hence my saying you can use 1st edition materials with it. Gives you the climate and terrain that the creature's found on, then its frequency. Frequency vanished in later editions. 3rd edition does not have frequency. Frequency was used to construct the encounter tables, which encounter tables also vanished in 3rd edition. The way encounter tables in the earlier games worked is you rolled a d12 and a d8, giving you a number from 2 to 20, on a slightly twisted bell curve. And what this meant was that the different positions on the table had a different likelihood of appearing, and thus you could stack your encounter table with things that had different chances of turning up. So you knew you put an uncommon creature in here and a rare creature in here, and you didn't need to vary. In 3rd edition, they did it with percentiles, and they varied the width of each entry. They didn't need to do that in 1st and 2nd edition. It was a very slick system. I don't know why they stopped using it, because it was really good. And the frequency was used to construct those tables, so you would know you put an uncommon creature into an uncommon slot, unless you want to have that particular creature more common in the local area than it normally is, in which case you put it into a more common slot, or less common than it normally is. So if you're in an area, say for example that orcs are common, but you've got an area where you know orcs have been mostly driven out, they might be uncommon or even rare in that area, so you stick them in the appropriate slot, and the encounter table makes sense. You've got get their activity cycle. Are they active during the day or the night? Useful information for a GM to know. Any diet notes? What do they actually eat? Again, useful to know. Why would you not want to know this? I mean, how stupid do you feel when you have something attack the party because it's hungry, only to discover later that it eats rocks?
Ben Dunn t-shirt.
Its intelligence is noted in this first section, so that you get an idea of how it's going to behave. And the important stuff from players' points of view, its treasure is also noted there. There's a treasure code. Those treasure codes disappeared in later editions. That's another good thing about 2nd. You had a code such as C, A, Q, whatever. And that code was rolled on a table.
Yeah.
Let's see.
You had different codes for lair treasures, if you encountered something at home, if you encountered something as a wanderer.
Just find the treasure tables very quickly. Treasure tables, page 115. Or maybe not. Right. Description of treasure tables. They're in Appendix 1. So if I come at it from the back, I'll probably find it quicker that way.
Yep.
He said, realizing that there are 3 appendices. Appendix 1, treasure tables.
Yay.
Right, so these are treasure tables. You can see that it's split into 2 halves. The first half is the lair treasures. If you find that dragon at home, it's going to have a treasure rolled on this table. The bottom half is the individual and small lair treasures. You find something wandering the streets, it's going to be rolled on there. And for each treasure type, you had a percentage chance and a value for each of copper, silver, gold, platinum or electrum, your choice, gems, art objects, and magical items. So, for example, a treasure type D, 10% chance of copper if there is 1,000 to 6,000, i.e. D6 times 1,000. 15% chance of 1 to 10,000 silver. 50% chance of 1 to 3,000 gold. 15% chance of 1 to 600 platinum or electrum. 30% chance of 1 to 10 gems. 25% chance of 1 to 6 art objects. And a 15% chance of magic. And if it had magic, it would be any 2 plus a potion. Nice random tables with a bit of variety. Each creature lists what treasure type it has, and you roll on the appropriate table. The individual treasures far smaller, like 3 to 24 copper there. Magic on the higher ones, any 1 item, any 2 items, any 2 potions, stuff like that. Nice system, much better than the later, more genericized treasure tables from 3rd edition. So then underneath the line, our monster gives us things like how many of them will appear at any given time. What is its armor class? What are its movement forms? How many hit dice does it have? What's its THAC0? That all-important lovely number. How many attacks? What damage do those attacks do? Does it have any special attacks or defenses? These are described in the text but listed here. Magic resistance if it has it. What its size is, including its actual size, so in this case large, 8 feet tall. So it gives you its size code and also how big it actually is. Morale, which is another rule that vanished later on.
Yeah. When demoralised, how likely is it to leg it?
You didn't necessarily have to kill everything in second edition, and if you cause your opponents to flee, you have beaten them. You get the XPs.
Yeah.
And then finally, its XP value. In the case of an Invisible Stalker, that's 5,000, bit better than the 15 XP Goblin. But it's also 8 hit dice and really hard to kill.
Yes. And invisible.
Yeah. You then get a paragraph describing it, a paragraph on how it fights, so you know. Invisible Stalkers attack by using the air itself as a weapon. It's capable of creating a sudden intense vortex that batters a victim for 4 to 16 points of damage. Such attacks affect a single victim on the same plane as the Invisible Stalker. Due to their invisibility, these creatures impose a -6 penalty on the surprise rolls of those they choose to attack. Similarly, all opponents who are unable to see or detect invisible foes are at -2 on their attack rolls. Though they are fully invisible on the prime material plane, their outlines can be dimly perceived on the astral or ethereal planes. Invisible Stalkers can only be killed on the elemental plane of air. If attacked on another plane, they automatically return to their home plane when their total hit points are exceeded by the damage they suffered. That's a standard for elementals. So there you go. You know how it fights. You know what's going to happen there. If it's got particular funky tactics it's going to use, they'll be mentioned. Special combat attacks, I'll mention things like that. Then, this is something that sort of vanished later on. It came in second edition, having not really been there in first, and it went away again and wasn't really there in the later ones. Habitat and society. How do they fit into the world?
Yeah.
And then finally, continuing the how do they fit into the world theme, the ecology of the Invisible Stalker. Invisible Stalkers are a species willingly transplanted to the prime material plane. In other words, they don't fit into the ecology of the prime material plane. But then we go on and we talk about them in terms of, why are they there? What are they doing there? Stuff like that.
One thing I like, I'm just reminded of, just reading that section, not everything was a monster. Not all the monsters were there to be killed.
No.
If you scroll back up to the alignment on Invisible Stalkers.
Neutral.
Neutral. Reading the ecology, you can befriend them. Instead of seeing everything as just an XP sink, or an XP mine, you could befriend an Invisible Stalker.
I mean, if we just flip through a few pages here.
Anyone who's befriended an Invisible Stalker can... Sorry.
Horse are obviously not there to be killed, necessarily.
No.
Hornets are a pest, although we do have giant hornets, so they're more than a pest. They should be hornet giant. Halflings have an entry. They're not necessarily there to be killed.
No.
Gnomes, likewise. Genies, quite often. Some of them are there to be killed, some of them are not. The Djinn is chaotic good, for example. Elf has 2 pages. Loads of stuff on the habitat and society of elves. And the breakdown of grey elves, wood elves, and half elves.
Yeah.
Note there's no drow there. They get their own page, though.
Yeah.
Effalumps. Probably not necessarily going to be there as a foe unless somebody is riding it.
But you've got such things in the ecology as, with animals, certainly, the beasts.
Dogs,
if you piss something off in its lair and then leave, it's unlikely to hunt you down and kill you. It might just let you go.
Yeah.
It's okay, right? I'm out of here now. Sorry, Mr. Bear, I'll be leaving now. Whereas I feel these days there's more of a must kill it. As long as there's one round of combat involved, right, that's it, it's dead.
Herd animal. Camels, cattle, buffalo, antelope, and sheep are not there to provide combat encounters. Let's be honest. They're there because they're in the world and you might need their stats someday.
Yeah. It's lovely having that sort of thing.
Yeah. A lot of those... these pictures at the back of here, by the way, which are just really nice pictures in the PDF version. In the original version, those were index dividers that came in there so that you could separate out the different portions of your book, organising them however you want. If you were here at the start, you may notice that that picture there is the one I'm currently using for the background image for the starting soon stream starting soon screens for D&D games.
Okay, English, you good to speak?
Yes, me English am good.
Yes.
Encounter tables. Here are those. You see those funky encounter tables I was talking about.
Yeah.
So let's look at one you can actually see, the temperate, plain, or scrub. So at the outsides of the tables, you are less likely to get those results. So on a temperate, plain, or scrub, DM special on 19 to 20, not very likely. Pegasus or troll, not particularly likely at all. Jump down to 10, 11, 12. Those are the things you're most likely to meet. A herd animal, a nomad, who 10% of the time will be a merchant, or a nomad or NPC party. NPC parties were a common encounter in this edition, and there were little tables for rolling up, like, was it 2 fighters and a wizard, or a cleric and a thief, or what? And these tables, just very versatile little tables because of the way they worked. It was a really nice idea. Then we have over here the monster summoning tables, because why not? Monster summoning shouldn't be entirely in the hands of the players as far as this edition is concerned. You cast Monster Summoning 1, you roll a d6 to see what you get. None of this, I choose to always summon the same creature, and the rest of the things in here, there wasn't any point listing.
Yeah.
Most players will only summon one thing, let's face it. Not in this edition. I can see the advantage of both sides on that, I must admit. I think they should have done a better job of making the different creatures worth summoning in 3rd edition, but I also do approve of the idea of being able to pick what you're summoning. That's nice.
Okay. I would say a fairly solid case has been made. Would you like to try a sum up?
I think certainly we should have given some people an idea of what we like about the game, even if we haven't persuaded them that they should like it. So, in summary, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition is the end of the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons game line, not just in terms of its name, but also in terms of its core system, which changed dramatically after that point.
Yeah.
So, for those looking for an OSR game, an old school revival game, don't look at 1st edition like all the OSR clones have done. The best version of that rule set is in fact Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition, which is available almost entirely in full in PDF from DriveThruRPG and its sister sites, dndclassics.com, I believe. Including the things we haven't touched on in this, such as the complete fighter, complete ranger, complete rogue, etc. class books, which add in kits and all kinds of wonderful stuff that we haven't even mentioned.
We could do an entire thing on kits and those books.
Kits, yeah. It has a combat system that makes sense what you get once you get your head around the idea that it works slightly differently, conceptually slightly differently to the later games. It is more abstract than combat is expected to be in later games because you're dealing with longer periods of time. The characters do not progress at the same rate, but that just means that you have more time to play with them. If you're coming into the game wanting to max out your character as soon as possible, if you're one of those turn to the final chapter of the book players, this is not the game for you.
No.
And that is very much the way a lot of players, both on tabletop and digital these days, do seem to play, that they want to get to the end as soon as possible. And that's not what, to my mind, that is not what a role-playing game, a tabletop role-playing game certainly is about. It's about playing it for as long as you can and having as much fun as you can on the time in between. So being able to play one character for year after year after year, getting into all kinds of scrapes and gradually leveling them up rather than blasting them through and getting them to level 20 at the end of a year and needing to play a different character. That, to me, is the right way to play. And this is the game to do it.
Yeah.
Because it is the most advanced form of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. It's the slickest, the best tested, the best organized, the best put together generally. It is the most sophisticated and evolved form of the earliest role-playing game ever. And it's still, even now, 20 years, more than 20 years after it was launched, almost 20 years after it was abandoned in favour of the new game, is still playable and still a lot of fun.
Yep.